across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome to the home of Common Sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back, of course, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Now, the row at the top of Reform UK has escalated as Nigel Farage and suspended MP Rupert Lowe trade fresh blows over bullying allegations which he denies. These are interesting times. Will Reform UK voters stand with Rupert or stand with the party? This is a genuinely interesting question and huge ramifications, not just for Reform, but I think for the wider spectrum of how we have recently got used to viewing democracy. Is that all about to tumble? I doubt it, but it's a wobbly time. And your responses, please. Also this afternoon, a fanatical Hamas supporter from Gaza who called for the slaughter of all Jews has filmed himself arriving in Britain on a small boat. I mean, you genuinely have to scratch your head and think, well, how the hell did that happen? And where is this character now? Arrested, one would hope, and thrown into a cell. And Donald Trump has warned Zelensky that Ukraine may not even survive without US support in his latest attempt to pile pressure on the Ukrainian leader to give up territory to Russia. Harrowing times, unprecedented. We'll investigate, and details on the way. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. So here's the thing. I mean, this Reform story really does get filed under the category of stuff you couldn't make up. I mean, it's worth just rolling back. Most of you will be familiar with the chronology of this, but a party with just 5 MPs, I mean, you could fit them all in a black cab, found themselves recently not only leading in the polls, but leading the debate. These were happy days, halcyon days for Reform UK. Immigration, money wasted in government, DEI, gender madness. These guys were ahead of it all. They were pressing the klaxon with more persuasion and regularity than MPs who've been in the House of Commons for 20 years. Talk about punch above your weight. These guys were on fire, leading the charge on all matters bonkers. Had been Rupert Lowe. I'd say front and centre, the multi-millionaire businessman with little or no need for fame or glory. I don't even think he takes a salary. I think he gives it away. A style of emphatic delivery and passion that has landed brilliantly, not just with Reform voters, but also members of the wider public. Even Elon Musk, of course, endorsed him and said he should lead the party. In fact, just stop right there, stick the handbrake on. Even Elon Musk suggested Rupert Lowe, not Nigel Farage, should be leading Reform UK. I would suggest, with a reasonable amount of confidence, no one's going to say it out loud, that's your pinch point. Right there is where this story in earnest began. I'm sure battles of the egos between politicians is perfectly standard practice, if you like. You know, enormous rows and disagreements and then rocking up at the end of the day for a few swift pints of wicked ale. That's how it works. So that's fine. Disagreement is fine. I think the Musk thing was potentially pivotal on what happened here. Rupert Lowe said Reform UK tried to silence him over his outspoken views on immigration. He was very animated on this. He said he'd been warned by the party's leadership but had refused to listen and was making no apologies for his comments. He posted on Sunday, and forgive me if you're familiar with some of this, he called for 1 million illegal immigrants to be deported and said that Nigel Farage, the Reform leader, might not agree with him, but it was the right thing to do. So he's in a very different place on the specifics of what he wants. There is at least a difference of emphasis, put it that way, between Mr Farage and Mr Lowe on things like immigration. Now, of course, there's been this row over a string of allegations about bullying. Mr Lowe has completely denied this. In fact, quite interestingly, Andrew Bridgen, the former tinfoil-hatted Conservative MP, did write something that I thought was a really interesting post on X just a little while ago. He said, "The plot thickens. One of my former parliamentary aides went on to work with Rupert Lowe. She's one of the staff involved in these allegations against him. She's told me that her original complaint had nothing to do with Rupert personally and was related to the actions of another member of staff." Mr. Bridgen says, "I have permission to post this tweet." Now, that kind of throws it up a little bit. So we have a curious situation where one of the biggest players, if you like, in reform, I mean, he's the Rupert Lowe. I was going to say Rupert Lowe is the Lionel Messi and Nigel Farage is the Ronaldo, but you could throw that around the other way. Either or, you'd want both of these people on your team sheet, no doubt about it. These are, very persuasive characters. They're, I'm sure, ego-driven in lots of different ways. I haven't got a problem with any of that. But both are very, very good at speaking the language of ordinary people. Now, you might fundamentally disagree with them. You might not give a hoot about reform or the people within it. But nobody could in any way reduce or somehow dismantle the argument that Rupert Lowe was and is a very powerful orator. He speaks well. He posts very engaging content on social media, and when he stands up in the House of Commons, you realise this guy's done his homework on various pet projects about money wasted and immigration and where housing goes, etc., the regional differences, more so, as I said at the outset, than MPs who've been there for absolutely decades. Richard Tice, the deputy leader of Reform, denied that Mr. Lowe's suspension was Putin-esque. He said in an interview on Sunday that was a completely inappropriate description. He says the reality is behind the scenes there's been a number of difficulties and challenges, and you get to a point when you have to say enough is enough. I mean, enough is enough to pretty much fire one of your greatest players. I mean, what would be enough, to go back to the football analogy, to say, yeah, enough is enough with Messi. We think he's sometimes a bit moody in the changing room, so we're going to get rid of him. Something really seismic has got to have happened. It's either something Rupert Lowe has done, which he emphatically denies, or it is really, ultimately, when it boils down, just a clash of personalities. Earlier, Mr. Lowe suggested he'd been frozen out as part of his issues, as I said, over mass immigration. He said it's been reported in today's Telegraph that sources in the Reform leadership close to Nigel are upset with me because I'd been outspoken on the need for deportation. He continued, just so that everyone is crystal clear, I stand by every single word I have said on this subject. So where do you stand on this? Because I would take a reasonable punt. There's quite a lot of you out there that cross the line from particularly the Conservative Party, but also Labour, over to Reform. And you did so because you liked the cut of their jib for many reasons. And I would almost bet the two people that you really liked were Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe. It is now only 50% of that duo exist. But that is clearly troubling times. We've got one Reform MP who, because of elements of his past, never gives interviews, just does basic constituency work. We'd hope so. So he's not heard of. So there's really only three main players that are now left in Lee Anderson, Richard Tice, and Nigel Farage. Between those three, that is kind of it. I can't imagine Mr. Lowe ever creeping back into the inner circle of Reform. I mean, stranger things have happened. It's possible they have a bit of an investigation, or say they have an investigation, everything looks tickety-boo, and yeah, all is good. It could happen. For the sake of the party, that's what should happen, because this could be the start of something even bigger. Will Reform UK voters, and if you are either a Reform voter or a member, or your intention is, having seen how things have panned out over the last 6 or 7 months with the new government, Reform is the party you're thinking of voting for, what does this show? Do you stand with Rupert Lowe, from what you know, or with the party? 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Simon Danczuk, former Labour MP and now a Reform UK member. Simon, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Good to join you.
Always good to have you with us. I mean, interesting and timely question. You're a recent convert to Reform UK. I mean, you had been very sympathetic to a lot of what they've been saying for a while now. But as you're now fully signed up, this kind of happens. What's your immediate response to what is going on in your party?
Well, it's very messy and it's unhelpful, and I hope it gets resolved very quickly. I'm sure it will do, but it is a turn-off for the wider public, and I'm sure that the politicians involved are well aware of that. I mean, you're exactly right. Rupert's an exceptionally good parliamentarian. He's come to this just from the July general election. Nigel has been around many years, an exceptionally good communicator. These are our star politicians, and to have this dispute between the two of them is unhelpful. There's no doubt about that, but I'm hoping that they can resolve it. I mean, it's fair to say from what I can see, and I know all the main characters to a greater or lesser extent in this, that a dispute has arisen, and I can't help but think it's come from this interview that Rupert did with the Daily Mail a few days ago, where he was critical of Nigel. Now, I think there's fault on both sides in this. I think he went too far in that interview. He shouldn't have been as critical as he was. I don't think he's really towing the line as strongly in terms of party policy around immigration as perhaps what he should be doing. So there is some fault in terms of Rupert, if we're being honest about this. But at the same time, I think there's been an attack on Rupert as a consequence of that Daily Mail interview, and they've gone for him. And this is, you know, I've been around politics and observed and been at the centre of political spats like this over many years, and that's what appears to be going on from my perspective. The chairman, Zia Youssef, and Lee Anderson have gone for Rupert to try and put him down a notch or two, and it's created one heck of a mess. Indeed.
Well, look, you're right. Mr. Lowe gave that interview. That sparked something off. Nigel Farage responded to it here on Talk, actually. It was the first time he gave that fairly interesting and some might say surprising response. But here he is just at the tail end of last week responding to that interview and the details around Rupert Lowe.
We are not a protest party in any way at all. That is utterly wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. We are an entirely positive party. Come to any reform event and the positivity, the energy, and perhaps you should come to one or two.
I've been. I came to your one in Birmingham. There were fireworks.
Well, look, do you know what? If I've got a following out there, that's a good thing. If I hadn't, we wouldn't have won any seats in Parliament at all on the 4th of July.
Including Great Yarmouth, I presume you put in that.
Wouldn't have been a cat's chance in hell, would there? Come on, be honest about it.
Rupert Lowe, will he still be a Reform MP by the next election? What do you reckon?
Well, I hope so, but he seems to be taking a tone that says he might not accept us, but there you are.
There it is. Well, I mean, obviously there's a divide there, Simon, and it's quite seismic. Is it, I suppose, here's the question, is it salvageable?
I think that's a really good question. I hope it is. I think Rupert makes a fantastic contribution to Reform UK. I mean, needless to say, so does Nigel. I mean, he was very animated in that interview. I'd previously watched it, and he's been very upset by what Rupert said. And I think Rupert went too far. But we really need to resolve this. I think a wider issue here is that whilst there's a lot of political experience in Nigel and others, and Richard Tice, who I rate very heavily, there is a lack of parliamentary experience, and parliamentary politics is done very differently, and not many of them have been in there very long. And there's also a lack of political experience at the centre of the party. So you've got Zia Youssef as the chairman. I don't think he's had any political experience beyond the last 12 months or 18 months. And that's significant. I think they need stronger politics at the centre of the party. as the Conservatives do, as Labour do. They have chairmen who've been around politics 30, 40 years. And that's what's missing, I think, in reform.
And I guess one of the problems, and it shouldn't be a problem, because in a way it's the greatest strength of politicians like Nigel, like Rupert, in the same way as Mr. Trump. These are guys that have been independently successful. You know, Rupert's a multimillionaire, doesn't need to go to work. He's had an incredibly successful career in business. You know, the idea of saying to someone like Rupert Lowe, oh, you've got to adhere to this line or toe this particular view or don't go outside the parameters of this opinion. I mean, that language doesn't wash with people like Rupert Lowe. And that's the difficulty, I suppose, with parliamentary or party political inexperience, is that you do end up potentially with situations like this.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's part of the issue that's arisen here. You're exactly right. I mean, the bigger picture is that the British public are crying out for an alternative to the mainstream parties that have gone before. Many people aren't happy with the Labour government. They weren't happy with the Conservatives, and Reform have a real role to play. So I hope they can, come together, move on from this and learn from it quite quickly.
Simon, stay with us. Simon Danczuk, former Labour MP, now Reform UK member with us on the programme. This one came in from Darren, who says, I hope you read this out. Nobody else will. I voted for Farage, UKIP, Brexit, Reform parties at every election since 2005. I have a couple of thousand leaflets I volunteered to hand out for Reform in the up-and-coming elections in May, but I'm now seriously questioning whether I should bother or indeed even support Reform any longer. No one really knows what's been going on in the last few days, and whilst I like Nigel, I can't help but wonder if indeed he is the problem, what with all the people he's fallen out with over the years. He is the common theme in all of this. Their reaction reporting to the police of allegations the day after Rupert's comments smacks of political dirty tricks. There's something I don't like about Zia Yusuf also, although I can't quite put my finger on why, but I would certainly question the motive behind his actions, and I think he should go now. I think he's the main agitator with all of these goings on. I just don't know any longer. Every time Reform makes progress, they shoot themselves in the foot, regardless of who is actually to blame. And I'm tired of it. Very sad, says Darren, but no real surprise. That is a view that many, I sense, are taking. And certainly, calling in the police, which is a big old step. And the police would just go, nothing really to see here, no massive allegation against anybody, so it'll drop. But the headline has successfully rooted itself into this narrative, and that's where the damage is done. We'll have more from Simon Danczuk in just a couple of moments, of other incredible stories that are on the news agenda as well. And that question to you, will Reform UK voters stand with Rupert Lowe or stand with the party? 0344 499 1000.
and he was able to stay up there for extraordinarily 16 hours. Massive, big sort of security. Everybody and his mum turned up after the fact he climbed up there. A, how was he able to climb up there? B, why wasn't he shot immediately and brought down? And C, at what point are we going to think that we might actually want to provide proper protection to the building which is the home of our democracy?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 23 minutes after 1 o'clock. We have Simon Danczuk with us, former Labour MP, now member of Reform UK. This was a distressing story, distressing and gobsmacking in equal measure, I suppose, Simon. The Palestinian migrant Abu Wadi, who filmed himself arriving in Britain on a migrant boat, posted it online. This is a guy that had called for the slaughter of all Jews. I don't know what happens here when we know who this person is. One would assume someone knows where he was sent to on arriving. This story may have developed and I've missed it, but surely somebody like this should have been arrested immediately and thrown into jail.
Yeah, you would have hoped so, wouldn't you? You've got this guy coming into the United Kingdom, and it's the UK border force that, instead of stopping him coming in, which you would have hoped the UK border force would do, they brought him into the country. So they put him on one of the boats and brought him and some other people into the country, what we see regularly now with illegal immigrants. And the biggest concern here is that, by all accounts, the allegations against him are that he's an Islamic extremist. I mean, he's very pro-Hamas, supporting the terrorists out there in the Middle East, very anti-Semitic. And yet we've brought him into the country. And I understand from latest reports, he's been put up into a hotel. Now, it's now being said the Home Office have subsequently arrested him.
Yeah, we're now hearing he was arrested last night by immigration enforcement for entry without leave.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we need to know how quickly he's going to be got rid of. Yeah. And the important point here, actually, Ian, is that the only reason we know about his views is because he's a prolific user of social media. So he's been posting on TikTok and other social media platforms. So we know how extreme he is. Now, I believe that we're allowing people into this country in a very similar way who don't share their views about extremism and the Middle East and so on and so forth. And yet we are facilitating them coming into this country. And that's where the problem lies. We're importing people into this country who actually stand completely against our values, and this is a perfect example of it.
Yeah, and an example of what Rupert Lowe has been very animated about, and felt that on that point there was a divide between his rather passionate opinions and that of the party as a whole. But we will come back to all of that. Let's look at what's happening in two stories out of North America, one from North America itself, one from Canada. Donald Trump claiming Ukraine may not survive as pressure mounts on Zelensky to cede territory occupied by Russia. This is in exchange for renewed US support. Let's have a listen to what the American president had to say.
Are you comfortable with that? The fact that you walked away and Ukraine may not survive?
Well, it may not survive anyway, but, we have some weaknesses with Russia. It takes two. Look, it was not going to happen, that war, and it happened. So now we're stuck with this mess. Think of what he stuck me with.
So there it is. Ukraine may not survive. And that's a big statement from the president, Simon.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite a scary situation, really. I mean, I think he's saying that because Russia have had some success in attacking Ukraine in recent days. But this is part of Donald Trump's negotiating style, isn't it? This is about getting Zelensky round the table to bring peace, but it's also about trying to get a minerals deal with Ukraine. And Donald Trump's style of doing business is very different to what he was like last time. He's much more forthright, knowing that this is the only time he'll be president ever again. I am surprised that we've been shocked by Donald Trump's approach to this whole issue. It's as though we and other European countries have been taken by surprise from Donald Trump's approach. The reality is, we've known how he approaches these issues. We should have anticipated it better. And what Europe and Britain should have been doing is building up defences much more heavily, much more strongly. Keir Starmer is trying to portray himself as this, prime minister who's very supportive of the military. The truth is, he's being dragged screaming and kicking to spend 2.5% on the military in the last few weeks. Yeah. That's the reality of it.
And let's move to this story as well. Canada has a new Prime Minister. His name is Justin Trudeau, but this time he's using the name Mark Carney, because I don't see very much is likely to change. But Mr Carney, former Governor of the Bank of England, faces significant challenges, it is said, as he steps into office. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau expressed his love for Canada over the weekend, showing that Carney may have a lot of work cut out for him. Let's have a listen.
On a personal level, I've made sure that every single day in this office, I put Canadians first, that I have people's backs. And that's why I'm here to tell you all that we got you. Even in the very last days of this government, we will not let Canadians down today and long into the future.
Unless you're a trucker during a flu pandemic, of course, then things look a little different, Simon. But there he is. That's the outgoing. He's gone. Mr Carney is in. He's not going to be there for very long, of course, because they've got to have an election before October. So this could be a little more than Liz Truss's time in office, but not by much.
Yeah, it's interesting times, isn't it? And I think it relates back to the previous discussion around Donald Trump. Yeah. I think Mark Carney was assisted by Trump's suggestions that he would like, well, to put it bluntly, he would like to take over parts of Canada. And I think that helped Mark Carney really electorally rally against that and say that he would stand up to Trump. So, I mean, Trump's impact on the world can't be underestimated. It's affecting Canada. We know it's affecting Russia and Ukraine. I mean, it's all change internationally. And, the old institutions that we followed, the United Nations, NATO, everything else, are really breaking down. Politics are being done differently in nearly every major country across the world. And Canada's another example of it. Indeed.
Simon, we hit the clock. Thank you, as ever, Simon Danczuk, his former Labour MP. I don't think we have to keep calling him former Labour MP. Maybe there's another few weeks in that. I don't know. He's now a Reform UK member, perhaps hoping for selection. I don't know. We'll talk to him another time on that, to become a candidate, but very passionate about what is happening in Reform. Many of you getting in touch. Loads of calls to come through. David says, I have for a while thought that Nigel Farage sees himself as the only man possible to defeat Labour, but he's showing the same fragile ego of a Trump that doesn't work in the UK. Reform have lost two best hopes for the future, Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe. I'm so disgusted with how any dissent or ideas are seemingly shut down by Farage and his henchmen that I've cancelled my membership of Reform and unlikely now to vote for them. It is interesting that, Ben Habib, although Ben didn't make it as an MP, an absolutely crucial voice. Again, another one of those emphatic, common sense voices. Don't come along very often. But Reform had three of them there, in Ben, in Rupert and in Nigel. Now they have one of them. Lee Anderson still there, of course, as an MP, but you take my point. How damaging is this? Do you stand by Rupert Lowe? Do you stand by the party? I'll tell you what, we're going to speak in a moment to a man called, we've spoken to him before, called Alan Sked. Now, Alan is the guy that started UKIP, essentially. He was the founder of UKIP. And we've interviewed him before. I can promise you now he will not be particularly flattering towards Nigel Farage in all of this. He's really not a Farage fan. But he is a man that knows this area of politics very well. He's the founder of UKIP, for goodness sake. He knows this territory. What does he make of what is going on? And how can a party like Reform begin to move forward? We'll get his views in a moment. Your views on the way as well. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 2522. One here from Alan in Notts, who says egos in politics is a huge problem, whether it's Reform or the Tories like Boris or any political party. They are supposed to be public servants and put their own egotistical power plays to one side. Sadly, the embarrassing and frankly pathetic Reform spat is another failure of political democracy in this country for decent, despairing citizens. Great show. Yeah, good point, Alan. I don't know how you'd ever really get it out of politics, because often the very reason why some of these people get into it is because of the power play, and they might do so, might not be their only driving force, philosophically I'm sure, driven by the passion of their own agendas. But being up there in the light, they call it showbiz for ugly people politics, don't they? And there is a little bit of truth in that. The row continues at the top of Reform UK. In fact, it's intensified as Nigel Farage and suspended MP Rupert Lowe trade blows over bullying claims. Mr Lowe denies these. He's accused the party of political revenge after criticising Farage's leadership and branding Reform a protest party. You heard Nigel Farage telling Talk just at the tail end of last week, which is really where this story began to explode, when Mr Farage appeared on this station. Said we're definitely not a protest party. Meanwhile, just to thicken the plot a little more, a senior lawyer investigating the bullying claims has rejected Rupert Lowe's assertion that she was shocked by the process or evidence gaps. She said, I don't know anything about what he's talking about. Earlier on the programme, around about 20 minutes ago, we spoke to Reform UK member and former MP Simon Danczuk, who said the dispute is unhelpful to the party's cause.
And I can't help but think it's come from this interview that Rupert did with the Daily Mail a few days ago, where he was critical of Nigel. Now, I think there's fault on both sides in this. I think he went too far in that interview. He shouldn't have been as critical as he was. I don't think he's really towing the line as strongly in terms of party policy around immigration as perhaps what he should be doing. So there is some fault in terms of Rupert, if we're being honest about this. But at the same time, I think there's been an attack on Rupert as a consequence of that Daily Mail interview, and they've gone for him.
Simon Danczuk speaking to me a few moments ago. Let's have a word with Professor Alan Sked. Alan, for those who don't know, is the founder of UKIP. Alan, good afternoon to you. I mean, you've been around the block in this particular area of the spectrum of politics. The word ego is getting mentioned quite a lot. A lot of our contributors and listeners who are naturally reform supporters talking about battles of egos. Hard to extrapolate an ego, isn't it, from a political party? They're almost made of them.
Well, I'm sure that's true, but in Nigel Farage's case, he seems to find it impossible to work with others, particularly if the others are articulate, intelligent, and are able to put forward their point of view in a reasonably moderate way that appeals to an electorate, perhaps more than he does. And he's, in the case of Rupert Lowe, he must be extremely exercised because Elon Musk, who saw through Farage after a couple of meetings and said he was unfit to be the party leader, apparently is backing Lowe as a man to lead the party and to do the job. So he'll be incensed at that. But his whole career has always been built on him being the top dog and the one who controls whichever party or whichever body he's at the top of. He does not work with others. He doesn't like criticism of any kind. And Rupert Lowe has said the party is a protest party led by a messiah. So that wouldn't have gone down very well either. I think Nigel just simply has to be in control. He has to control the policies, the economics, the finances, the organisation, or whichever party he's heading. And there's no room for any others. There's no room for any competition, any competitors. That's not part of his scheme. It's almost a kind, I wouldn't say, Mussolini used to say the leader is always right. And that's something that Farage believes. He's anyone who criticizes him or who is held up in the press as a possible competitor or successor to him is finished. That's just how it happens. And on the far right, where he has been active, there are the bodies are littering all over the place in his history, and that meant that intelligent, attractive voices in reform, like Ben Habib and now Rupert Lowe, have just got to be got rid of.
But Nigel must also know, Alan, that you're right. I mean, yes, of course, I've known Nigel for a long while as well. And, he is that character. He's, a one-man campaigner, fairly autonomous, very persuasive, even if you don't like him. I know you have your own views on him as a person, etc. But, a good operator in that respect. But he's not stupid. So he must know that, if he wants a party to succeed and become the government, that he's got to work with others.
No, I don't think he sees that at all. I think you overrate his intelligence. I mean, Nigel sees himself as almost a messiah figure, and he sees himself as someone to whom the rest of the party should pay homage. There's also, I think, in this dispute with Lowe, a number of policy and organizational disputes. Lowe wants to modernize the party in a certain way. Nigel says he's already modernizing it, for which I don't think there's much evidence. And there seems to be disputes over things like, do you deport millions of people at once, or do you do it gradually? So only on the very far right would you get such a dispute. But I think there are probably disputes. When Lowe is interviewed, and I've seen him interviewed a couple of times, and he's rather impressive, and he's always rather measured and informed and articulate when he's interviewed. He does cover a range of issues. He does seem to have some kind of historical knowledge of British politics. I don't get... and he seems to have an intellectual grasp, the same as Ben Habib did, of the British political scene, how it's developed, in a way that I don't think Nigel had. I mean, I remember in 1997, when I was party leader, Nigel tried to start a revolt in UKIP because he thought we should have won the 1997 general election when we had a budget of £40,000, had been ignored by the media, and were facing not only the three major parties, but also Jimmy Goldsmith's Reform Party, and Jimmy Goldsmith had £40 million to put in. But Nigel still wanted a public inquiry as to why we hadn't won the election. And it was the first time we'd ever appeared in British politics as UKIP. So I threw him out of the party, and the National Executive agreed because he was simply too stupid.
Do you sense there's a comeback then on this? You know, I mean, the strangest things happen in the world of politics, even in areas that aren't necessarily your cup of tea or whatever. You know, people do sit down and go, look, this is stupid. Richard Tice is an intelligent man, the chairman. I would imagine, you know, he's put his money into this project because he would like to see results, one would assume. Is there a chance, do you sense that they could sit around a table and go, do you know what, this is a bit crazy, you know, because Rupert's a great player, Ben Habib's a great player, let's get these guys back in, because if we are serious about winning, these are the kind of people we need?
No, I don't see any sign of that. Tice is a very strange figure because, as you say, he sounds intelligent, and but he's always been a kind of bag carrier to Nigel. And as far as Ben Habib is concerned, he's been out the party now for a little while, and I don't think there's been any attempt to get him back in. No. Because if there were, I mean, if he were to come back and he and Rupert Lowe were to gang up together as the voice of reason inside reform, Nigel would go nuts.
Yeah. Well, yes, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Fly on the wall territory. Listen, Alan, always good to get your view on these things. Thank you, Professor Alan Sked, founder of UKIP, with us on the programme. He doesn't see any possibility of rekindling relationships. I think Richard Tice, and I know Richard, and I've always sensed that he's one of the most decent men in politics, very passionate about everything he believes with. He doesn't come with a whole load of baggage. He doesn't come with kind of unnecessary controversy. And the time I really felt for Richard Tice, if you remember, when Rishi Sunak called the election, we forget this. Nigel Farage says, no, I'm not standing. I'm going off to America to work with Donald Trump. I happen to know that did cause a lot of friction among many people who were thinking, what the hell? But it was seen as evidence that Nigel is a one-man band. And it wasn't ever really about, a reform government. It was about where Nigel could find his voice being best heard and where he could be best placed. And at that particular point, he obviously thought, do you know what? The best place for me is with Trump. That puts me, again, in a very unique position as a big British voice over there, who would be the translator of the voices over there, over here. So he retains his profile, albeit in a different setting. And then, of course, talks were done and Farage was back in. But in that first day or so, Richard Tice was walking around studios having to give interviews that he wasn't expected to give. That he wasn't letting it go, he kept it going. But I know this was a tricky time. So will Reform UK voters stand with Rupert, or will they stand with the party? 0344 499 1000. Also, some breaking news. You may be aware of the tanker and a cargo ship that have collided in the North Sea. This is off the coast of East Yorkshire. This is according to the port of Grimsby East. We now hear there are 32 casualties that we've had reported so far. That has gone up from 20, which was the case around about an hour ago. 32 casualties. The details of what that specifically means we are yet to get, but that is what we have so far. 32 casualties reported after that tanker and cargo ship collided in the North Sea, just off the East Yorkshire coast. Details on the way. And we're back to your calls in a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000.
What are you hearing on the streets?
Well, what I'm hearing is that, you know, the public support for Netanyahu is very, very low. It's fading away. You know, at the same time, when you ask people, well, who would you prefer? The problem is that there's no obvious replacement. So whilst his ratings, if you like, are at an all-time low, nor is there an immediate solution for that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is from John in Wallington. It says, Ian, when Reform take Wales next year, what will people be saying about the prospects of Nigel and Reform UK then? My guess is he will be the bookies' favourite for Downing Street. Nigel is a better strategist than Rupert. Well, I don't know if he's a strategist. I think to some people that's the biggest criticism of him, that he's not. That he's a great operator and the best speaker, but underpinning that is not the strategy. That's I'm merely imparting the accusation from his critics. But you're right, John, if Reform were running Wales, I mean, if that happened, it would be seismic. You're absolutely right. One here says, why have you let Alan Sked call Reform far-right twice without challenge? Well, if the founder of UKIP can't use the term far-right, I don't know who can. He wasn't using it as a pejorative. That was the point. I think he was identifying where Reform sit in the kind of spectrum of Conservatives are on the right and they're further right, for example. But, I mean, this is the guy that literally started UKIP. So I think we can give him a bit of a pass on that challenge. This one, Mick, who says Reform have left us with hope and years of Starmer without hope, and years of Starmer and Reeves control. They still have time to put Ben Habib in charge and lead us all out of dictatorship, says Mick. One of the accusations against Nigel, of course, is that he's seems a bit lukewarm compared to where people thought he was on things like immigration. There is a date, you have to analyse politicians. You've really got to look into their backstories, what makes them tick. If you start supporting Dodge Pop McDougall as your local candidate at the next election, then look into the 10 things Dodge Pot has said in his past, his affiliations, who he's done business with, who he drinks with, the likelihood of him saying what you want him to say. Rather than does Dodgepot give you a nice feeling an affirmative feeling in the pit of your tummy when he speaks, because that ain't good enough. It's very persuasive and it works all over the place, particularly at the moment. But it's not real. To get real about it, you've got to know your beans on the people involved if you want to make an authentic and a fairly qualified view on them or opinion on them. This is David in Manchester. What have you got for us, David? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Yeah, so my sort of stance on it, really, I've got a lot of time for Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe. The only thing I would say, as Simon said earlier on when you were interviewing him, I thought it was a little bit ill advised to go to the papers on Rupert's. I just thought it was...
go to the police, did you say?
No, to the papers. I didn't like the article in the paper. I thought it was a little bit critical of the party.
The one that Rupert was behind. Yeah, okay, yeah, and a fair point. Simon mentioned that as well, didn't he?
Yeah, so for me, I'm a bit sort of old school. I would prefer people to sit at the bar, have a pint and get it sorted out.
100%. And that would normally... Sorry to interject, David, but I think you're probably on the same page as me on this. That's what we thought the Reform boys did, wasn't it? I've
followed them for a long time.
That's what they did. Other parties, fire people, suspend them, call the police. No, Reform, they go to the pub, have a pint and make it better.
Yeah, and of course, all the players in this, Ben Habib, got a lot of time for him. of course, anybody, and you want a united party. And on another note, let's be quite honest about this. Certainly, I mean, I've lived in London. I'm now in Manchester, and there is a massive appetite because I think the country's at a crossroads when it comes to politics. The Tories, for me, I see no difference in the Tory party and the Labour Party. I see them as sort of all one party. And there are issues now that really people, at ground level. I think I'm a retired police officer, and I think I know people's feelings. And people do want change. You're going to have people who disagree with your politics, but there are some real issues, and I don't see the other party sorting them out. So I see a bit of a storm in the teacup at the moment, and hopefully it can get resolved.
I think that's I think that's a fair analysis, because I mean, let's remember all the things that people voted for reform for. They haven't changed. Those, their policies on, all the madness that's going on, the waste of money, the huge, ridiculous, bonkers agendas that the mainstream parties follow.
Absolutely.
Reforms still have those. That hasn't changed. So it's really just this sort of curious mechanism and a couple of ego issues in the party. If they can...
In politics, it's been discussed, this morning on your programme.
Yeah.
When it comes to any party, when you've got people at the top, it's sort of what makes people, these people, to get to the top. Yeah, you've got to have a bit of an ego, but hopefully it can get sorted out. But I would like a party, to be honest, with Rupert Lowe in it. I vote Ben Habib as well. I've got a lot of time for a very articulate man.
Sure.
And, would like a more united party. But I think it's a storm in a teacup, and hopefully it can get sorted out.
I hope it does. David, thank you. David in Manchester on Reform UK. Carl in Derbyshire says, when you join a political party like I did with Reform, you would hope the party would at least last beyond the careers of the main protagonists. I've supported Nigel Farage on 3 occasions now, and every time he's pulled the rug from under his supporters. For Reform to survive, it really needs to fully democratise and allow other members to thrive. The king of Reform needs to abdicate. Now, there is that view, and I think people say it maybe with a degree of reluctance. This is not all about, with any enthusiasm that you think Nigel Farage is the guy that people point to, one of the most recognisable faces in politics. He's the man, absolutely, that will make the House of Commons go quiet when he stands up and speaks. He's the guy that's booked for question time and the like a disproportionate amount of times because he always delivers. Whether it's all of those kind of areas, to lose that would be kind of extraordinary. 0344 499 1000. This comes from Sean in Gloucester. He says, good afternoon, Ian. The fact that Reform are under such close scrutiny by the media is a massive compliment and a sign that the establishment is scared by them. People have had enough of the Labour and Tory merry-go-round of doing nothing and ignoring our wishes. It is time for a fresh approach, and that is Reform. There will be bumps in the road on the way to power. Does any other party with only a few MPs get such in-depth coverage? No, but then in that respect, I suppose you could say, as a very good point from Sean, I guess you could say, well, Reform have punched above their weight, brilliantly punched above their weight. I just said at the very beginning, they've managed to galvanise and get questions in the House of Commons and spark debate and initiate discussion with only 5 MPs. But I guess when you do that, you do come under a bit more scrutiny. This will be John in Hertfordshire. John, how are you doing?
Hi, Ian. Thanks for having me on.
That's all right. What are your thoughts?
I just wanted to say that I'm a Reform activist. We sort of grassroots. We get in there. We get things done.
Got it.
And this entire thing about Rupert Lowe, I think, is quite unbelievable. And I think there are 4.5 million plus people voted for Reform in the last election. I can tell you there's a few people who've decided they don't want to be part of Reform for whatever reason, and this knee-jerk reaction that people have. But the point is, Reform is still the only party that's got any chance of getting this country out of the mess. We've also got the elections coming up for the 1st of May where we need candidates. And, yeah, people are annoyed, but they still realise that, we're doing this for the 4.5 million people that voted for Reform and want to see some change. The people at the top need to grow up. They need to say sorry if they need to say sorry, and we need to move on because this is incredibly unhelpful for everybody. But nevertheless, Reform is still there, bashing away, knocking on doors, trying to do the right thing for the party.
Yeah, well, I made the point, John, to the our last caller that the policies haven't changed. So, it's that there's a bit of jip, there's a little bit of a fallout there. It is extraordinary, though, is it not? Having accepted everything you've just said, that I gave the comparison of Rupert Lowe being the sort of Lionel Messi and Farage being the Ronaldo, or the other way around, whichever one you want it. You don't want to lose either of those guys, surely.
No, absolutely. And I think people need to realise that when you get to this stage in politics, egos kick in, and you have differences of opinion. And I think that personally, that Lowe probably didn't do the right thing by making this a social media spat, and they needed to have sat down like gentlemen and discussed the problems. And, someone needs to tell these guys that, put your ego back. We're working for the country. Let's do what we have to do.
We're going to watch with interest. John, thank you very much indeed. Mark in Stafford makes this point. He says, I've been watching the Reform membership counter online, and the number has been going down rapidly in the last couple of days. I don't know how significantly, if they have. I've not seen that, Mark, but thank you. I've heard other people say it. He says, it seems some people aren't looking at the long game, and we are reacting in a knee-jerk manner. We've got 4 years to get Labour out of government. Just focus on that, says Mark in Stratford. Thank you, Mark, for that. We'll have some more calls and comments from you on the way. 0344 499 1000. Also joining us in the next section, Rees Ibrahim, the political commentator, is with us in the studio to chat over the big stories of the day. All of that and more, and of course you on the phones as well. Or you can message 87222. Let's get the latest news headlines at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back. It is the home of Common Sense. We are talking about that row at the top of the Reform UK party escalating as Nigel Farage and suspended MP Rupert Lowe trade fresh blows over bullying allegations. He, of course, denies any wrongdoing. Also this afternoon, a rescue operation is underway off the coast of Hull after a cargo ship collided with a burning oil tanker. More than 30 people are said to have been brought to shore, but some crew members are still feared missing. We await fuller details on all of that. It is a developing story. And a fanatical Hamas supporter from Gaza who called for the slaughter of all Jews has filmed himself arriving in Britain on a small boat. I mean, this is almost satire if it wasn't so darn serious and distressing. Thankfully, he's been nicked. But what does that mean? Don't hold your breath in this fella being sent back to Gaza, because it probably ain't going to happen. Check who's in power for details. We'll have more on that story and more from you, of course. 0344 499 1000. It is 4 minutes after 2 o'clock. Rees Ibrahim is with us in the studio. How are you doing?
Hello, Ian. Lovely to see you.
And you too. You're a political commentator, but there's much more to you than that, of course. You know,
well, my full-time job is I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is a free market think tank in Westminster.
Yeah, that must be quite fun at the moment because, I mean, you're having material fired at you from cannons at the moment. It's delightful, isn't it? Because there's never a dull day in picking the bones out of what our government are doing with our money.
Indeed, indeed. Not just from a taxpayer perspective, but also where that money is going and how we can best and most efficiently use it.
Yeah.
It's also about how we can achieve economic growth and prosperity.
Yep.
In the UK, we are currently facing the highest tax burden since the Second World War. We have huge amounts of money being wasted, both abroad and domestically. So there is so much that needs to be done, and the sort of torch for liberty needs to continue to be lit.
The torch for liberty needs to... You can have that on a statue one day, can't you?
Maybe on my gravestone.
In Trafalgar Square. So who is this? This is Reem. She said the torch needs to be... The torch
for liberty needs to continue to be lit.
There it is. Maybe we can have one of those ongoing flames like they have under the Arc de Triomphe.
I would love that. Maybe a bit like a statue for liberty, but in the UK.
But in the UK, with an ongoing flame.
Absolutely.
I think we need to phone some people, get the stonemasons on this early doors.
I think we do. I think we need to call them up and say, you know what we need is a statue for liberty. But unfortunately, the UK isn't very free, and that's the point, right? You've got journalists being arrested in every corner. You've got people being arrested for praying outside of abortion clinics. I mean, ultimately, from freedom of expression, even silently, right? I mean, from a freedom of expression perspective, we don't have it in the UK.
Right, and in fact, it gets worse because in Scotland, you could be caught doing it in your house if somebody saw you through a window praying.
Yeah.
That would be an arrestable offence.
Absolutely insane. The fact that a Tory councillor's wife got, was it 18 months in prison for a nasty Facebook post, but ultimately we should be defending the indefensible. We should be free to say nasty things.
Well, I said on the back of that, she was an idiot, but being an idiot is not a criminal offence.
Exactly.
Okay, when did we criminalise stupidity or a lack of subtlety or whatever?
Absolutely, and I really do fear for the space in which freedom of expression is allowed to occur in the UK. We absolutely have a freedom of expression crisis, and we've never had it before. I mean, in the US, you've got effectively in the Constitution, it shows that you're not allowed to restrict somebody's freedom of expression. Yeah. In the UK, it's really quite serious. I mean, the fact that you can be arrested and put into prison for such egregious crimes, and yet so many people for shoplifting, for quite horrendous criminal activity, absolutely never get taken to court because police are too busy worrying about people's hate speech. Yeah. I don't believe hate speech is a thing at all. I don't believe it should be illegal. I don't think it should be illegal to be hateful. I think people should be allowed to say things that aren't particularly nice.
It's incredible because you speak to some people kind of on the left and they go, how did this Trump character get elected? It's like, because of this. Yeah. Because of this kind of stuff. It is exactly that he identified, Vance identified, and said, the world has gone upside down. The Biden administration loved fanning the flames of all of this stuff. They'd have been squarely behind everything that is happening in this country, and now there's a big change because a bit of common sense appears to have prevailed.
Yes, it's really interesting. I think from that perspective, you need to have that kind of view that you are pro-common sense. Now, don't get me wrong.
Yep.
I think Trump has done a lot of things that I disagree with. I think the tariffs are bad economically, both for Americans and for everybody abroad. But ultimately, it's this feeling that common sense is back, that we're going to use Doge in order to cut government inefficiencies. Your hard-earned taxpayer cash is now actually going to be spent somewhere that's good. I mean, I would like a Doge in the UK. I think ultimately it's that perspective, it's that vibe, that feeling that things are now back to common sense and back to where they should be.
But is there trouble at mill? Because, of course, the one party that many people were putting their faith in to kind of reignite this very narrative and bring some of that common sense to the UK, Reform UK, they found themselves in the middle of this curious battle. I mean, you know, you don't want to be losing Rupert Lowe out of your party, frankly. I mean, this is, I said at the beginning, it's like losing Lionel Messi out of your football team.
Well,
I mean, this is a big player in the Reform, and Farage is, you know, the Ronaldo of the piece, or Rupert could be the Ronaldo, he could be the... My point is, they're equally big voices, and it's both of those kind of voices, some would even throw Ben Habib in there as well, that really need to be listened to.
I really do worry about the fact that Reform have 5 members of Parliament, now 4.
Yep.
5 members of Parliament, and there has already been
one
all
that
of this
doesn't
chaos.
speak as well, so that's kind of 3.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's difficult. I don't want to sort of point out names in particular with those particular people, but it's interesting where you've got 5 members of Parliament in the Reform UK that are entirely unable to coherently talk about these things. Their first attempt at policy was, quite frankly, embarrassing. The entire announcement around green energy, and they were saying they want to tax renewables. They say they want to abolish net zero, which I agree with, but then also tax renewables, ban BESS, which is battery energy storage systems. And I had a bit of an argument with Richard Tice about this on Twitter, and he wasn't particularly happy.
I remember, I think we might have, did we speak to you on that? I can't remember if we did or not, but it was, I think what happened there is that Reform got really surprised by lots of people on the right who thought, no, this isn't where we're coming from.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't go around taxing people. If someone's got an empire that's going to, you know, give us free energy, brilliant. Nobody's disputing that. That's amazing.
Exactly, and it did worry me, because I really did think that Reform were, you know, I'm a free marketeer. I believe in free markets and individual liberty. I really did think that maybe Reform could be seen as a kind of more positive influence when it comes to free market policies. You know, the fact that Reform have instinctively said, at least Nigel Farage himself has instinctively said things like, I want the state to stay out of our lives. I think we should be allowed to smoke. I think we should be allowed to do things as we wish. I think that freedom of expression is unequivocally an absolute right for individuals.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, you've got somebody like Richard Tice announcing policies, and then their head of press coming out saying that, actually, no, it wasn't really policy, it was a change of direction. It's embarrassing, and this week, what's happened with Rupert Lowe being suspended from the party, and you've got effectively people, you know, spokespeople of Reform coming out and saying that there were these bullying complaints that have been made. There's an official parliamentary investigation. This is really bad, especially in what is, it's not even been a year yet since Reform were able to gain those 5 members of Parliament. It's really worrying, and they've already lost 1 MP.
Can they recover from this?
They definitely can recover from this if they try extremely hard to professionalise, and you know, they have done this on some instances. I mean, they've said that their vetting processes are much more stringent than they ever have been in the past. But just thinking about this politically, the energy policy stuff, people like me care about it. People that vote Reform, generally speaking, probably don't care. You know, the vibe says net zero is bad, so I like it. You know, that's ultimately the kind of people that they were proposing to. People like me don't really matter in the grand scheme of things when it comes to Reform's policies on things like that. But when it comes to the politics of kicking out one of the most popular, I mean, out of the 5, let's be honest, after Nigel, Reform is, Rupert Lowe is the most popular.
But isn't the problem with that, and it's interesting that a friend who shall be nameless has just messaged me, knowing we're talking about this, saying, you know, you do realise Rupert Lowe is kind of, you know, a guy that's tricky. Now, I don't dispute that. He's a multimillionaire businessman. He's run lots of empires. He's been incredibly successful. Similarly with Nigel, I would say that's not so different. If you bring people in who've, you know, had a career elsewhere, it's a bit like trying to tell Trump what to do. You know, no one's going to... Rupert Lowe, I wouldn't imagine, is... When they say, look, if we're going to do this professionally, Rupert, we've got to sing from one hymn sheet. And he's going, but I disagree with you, so I'm not going to say it. Now, that's the problem that Reform are going to have. By getting these kind of characters in that are not conventional, if you like, professional. They haven't done the PPE stuff at Oxbridge. They haven't gone that route. They've not been a bag carrier for an MP. They're from the coalface of industry, if you like. They are people that have got their own successful careers. You can't tell those people what to do. You just can't. And that's... So Rupert and Nigel are kind of cut from the same cloth in that respect.
I actually think it's a really good thing that people like that are getting into politics.
100%.
I have long sung from that hymn sheet where I've basically said, look, so many politicians in the UK at the moment are career politicians. They started as a Labour councillor back in 2005, and they've moved up the ranks. They've never had a real job. There's that
got a photo with Harriet Harman from 20 years ago.
Exactly, from my going to Labour Party conference. It really is quite cringe, and what it means is that you've got a bunch of people in Parliament that are entirely out of touch. They don't know what it's like to be a real person pulling pints in a pub, or an everyday person that is doing real work that is actually contributing to the economy. These people do not know how to do that. And I'm not saying that is the case for every politician, but it certainly is the case for many more since the election last year, where a lot of these new Labour MPs have, quite frankly, never had a job outside of the Labour Party.
Indeed.
And I'm really glad to see people like Rupert Lowe getting into politics. But the fact is, the political system doesn't like people that have their own mind, that don't want to cater towards a particular party line, and ultimately somebody like Rupert Lowe just couldn't be leashed by the Reform, and he needed to be unleashed. I think it'll be interesting, what the next few years look like, because ultimately he's now an independent. He can say whatever he wants. He can say literally whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and I think that we're going to see him do that in the chamber.
Yes, because he's arguably not going to go back to Reform now, is he?
No, why would he?
That's not going to happen. He doesn't want it to happen. He doesn't really care, probably, at one level. As you say, he'll be an independent voice, unless he legs it from the job altogether and creates a buy.
Well, we're not going to see an election, at least over the next few years, unless these bullying allegations actually come out to be quite serious and true, and there's a by-election triggered. I don't see that happening. I think what will probably happen is he'll remain as an independent, and he will be a problem for Reform. I think that what they maybe didn't realise is that him being unleashed from the shackles of the party mean that actually he could become a bit of an opposition to what Reform end up standing for.
Who gains, the Tories or Labour?
I think the Tories absolutely gain from this. I mean, we'll see what Kemi Badenoch comes out with over the next few weeks. Obviously, we've got the spring statement, which, at least from my perspective, is going to be really important. They're making a lot of noise about benefits and whether or not the welfare state is too large. I think it is. If, and this is a big if the Conservative Party are able to respond to these, inadvertently respond to these kind of rumblings and say, we're the serious ones. Sure. We are different to the previous Conservative government, and we are serious, then they will absolutely win and gain from all of these rumblings that are happening within Reform.
On that point, Keir Starmer facing his own rebellion, of course. I think there's about 80 Labour MPs who are going to be opposing these planned welfare cuts. It's a curious world. The mind of the Labour MP is a beautiful thing, disturbing, but equally beautiful from a psychiatric and a psychological and a sociological perspective, because you've only got to say welfare cut and they will discombobulate, and just like that witch from The Wizard of Oz that melted, that's kind of what they do. It's like, what, welfare cuts? How dare you be prudent with welfare? It's like, you do realise that this is other people's money we're spending. This is other poor people's money as well that is being used, and you're saying we shouldn't revisit it, look at it, say, are we making the best use of the cash here? That's really what's happening. I mean, this could well be a good moment for Labour if they get this right.
If they get this right, and again, that is a big if. I mean, Rachel Reeves effectively saying that the welfare state is far too large and that some of these cuts need to be made, I think is absolutely unequivocally right, and I think is one of the first times I've seen something positive from Rachel Reeves herself. Look, I mean, the welfare state is absolutely too big, especially when we're accounting for the number of people that are now on long-term sickness benefits. We see huge numbers of people now on long-term sickness benefits, and the cost of welfare is probably going to go up to almost about £70 billion by the end of this Parliament. That is huge amount of money, and we've got to be very clear about this. Yes, it is a waste of taxpayer money. It is people that are working hard in this country that are being taxed to the oblivion, the highest tax burden since the Second World War, and then that money going to people that could be working that can't, or that aren't, sorry. However, it is also a waste of human potential. These are people that could be contributing to the economy, that could be contributing to their own lives, that aren't because the welfare state encourages them not to. And let's be very clear about this. There are many, many people that absolutely are on long-term sickness benefits that can be working. I saw some really interesting statistics recently. So there was a paper by, some research published by NHS Confederation and the Boston Consulting Group. And they found that in the year between 2021 and 2022, 60,000 people went from being economically inactive because they were students to then being economically inactive because they were signed off as long-term sick.
That's a terrible coincidence.
That's insane. I mean, how can you go from being well enough to study to then not being well enough at all to work? 63,000 people in 1 year.
So young people...
these are young people.
Ordinarily would be, you know, awaiting, they've been active students, and then suddenly, bang, they're ill.
A lot of it is mental health. So they are claiming that they are too sick to work based on the fact that they have poor mental health. Now, part of it is we need to solve the dire situation that's happening with the NHS, but also thinking about this point, if you're being told you're going to get upwards of £40,000 a year on benefits and you've got a young child, and then you're told, you know what, if you try and retrain, you're at risk of losing those benefits because it shows that you aren't indeed too sick to work, you know, basic incentives, who would say no to that?
But Ian Duncan Smith, you know, spent years trying to work this one out, didn't he? And did some brilliant work, as you know. And he, you know, properly began to nail it. And, you know, while he was sort of out of office, as it were, still an MP, you know, he was talking about this when nobody else was talking about it. Universal credit and getting some kind of semblance of common sense in the system. And there's been some success with that, but it's still a labyrinthine world that no one anywhere can see. The sort of Gordian knot of running the country is the welfare system.
I think the welfare system is one of the largest and most easily fixable problems that this country faces. We've got a bloating welfare state, and again, it's not just about the fact that this is taxpayer money being spent, although I think that's a really important point. There are millions of people across the country working incredibly hard, being taxed to the oblivion, and that money is going straight into the coffers of the Treasury and going straight to people that could be working that aren't. But it's a waste of human potential. These are millions of people across the country that are young, that are my age often, in their 20s, that are being told, you are too sick to work. Now, let me get this straight. If you are clinically depressed or, you know, clinically anxious, there is no evidence that the best thing for you is to be told you're not good enough to work, go home.
100%.
Where is the evidence that that's the best thing for them? Genuinely, from a mental health perspective, where is the evidence that's the best thing for them?
Because on balance, if an outsider might assume the very opposite to that would be perhaps the case. If
work
you're out
is good.
there,
in work, you've got dignity. In work, you have respect. You feel as though you're contributing
an
to something.
environment.
You've got a structure. You've got a schedule. You've got somebody telling you you've got to be somewhere in the morning and you've got time off in the evening. I really do think that this is a huge scandal, especially when you look into the numbers and how many young people there are being signed off as long-term sick. It's insane. Fraser Nelson, who's the former editor of The Spectator, did a brilliant documentary.
Yeah, we had him on talking about
He's absolutely brilliant, talking about, effectively, this problem where it's a trap. It's a welfare trap. You've got millions of people that are in this trap where they're saying, you know what, yes, I've been on long-term sickness benefits for a while. I want to work. There's one particular case that really shocked me. There was a girl that was a couple of years older than me. She had a son, and she was getting about £40,000 a year when you include child benefit and various other things, and because she was signed off as long-term sick, she had depression and some back problems. Altogether, £40,000 a year. That's an astronomical amount of money. She was told by the job centre and by various different officials that if she tried to retrain or tried to get back into work, she could risk losing all of that money. Now, she wants to work, but she's got a young child. Why would you then risk losing all of that money? So really the problem is these people are being trapped, and it's not just bad for the economy as a whole, not just unfair for those people that are working, that are contributing and are being taxed huge amounts, but it's unfair for those people, that are being trapped.
Listen, Reem, we hit the clock. thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you. Rees Ibrahim is with us, or has been with us for the last 20 minutes or so. Political commentator talking on the issues of the day. If you want to pick up on any of that, 0344 499 1000.
Those people who are actually fleecing the system are taking money away from the very people that you just talked about. You know, the disabled, people who are elderly, people who are, through no fault of their own, have ended up in the situations that they're in. And I really feel for them, because actually they're being done in by a system which people are gaming. I mean, on TikTok alone, there's these things called sickfluencers, where they show people how to get round the system and which words to use. It's pretty disgusting, to be honest with you, Julie.
Thousands of people, I think, if my figures are correct, I think 1,900 people came in just last week alone. We don't know, some people are not, you know, registering, they're just going on the run, and who knows, they could be going into terrorist cells in the country, and nobody in the country ever knows who these people are.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one from Chrissy, who says, Christina, in Spain, in terms of reform leadership, it's really important to remember that the leadership only truly works when you have the power with and not power over. Nigel needs to trust and delegate. This will only make reform stronger, respected and elected. I keep coming back to the point about someone trying to tell Rupert Lowe what to do. And it wouldn't matter that it was... Even though the guy knows how to run businesses, I can imagine he would be like talking to a brick wall to try and say, no, actually, Rupert, you've got to modify your view on this bit, and there's a reason for it. It's not a case of changing your view. You've just got to deliver it in a certain way, because we've got our eye on a bigger we've got to sell policies this way now, not that way, or something like that. And Rupert would have done, no, I'm not doing that. It's not how I work. And that's going to be the problem. When you get big egos and people from outside of the world of politics who've been incredibly successful, that is the kind of downside of what should be the absolute upside. This will be Fran in Leeds. Fran, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Ian. Yes, thank you for taking my call.
It's a pleasure. What are your thoughts?
On this reform thing, I'm bitterly disappointed and saddened I really don't think they should have gone public with all of this. It would have been far better if they'd kept a lid on it. But we've got to stick with it because there's just no alternative.
Yeah.
You've got.
you could argue, Fran. You could say. Sorry to interject. You could say, well, the policies haven't changed. It's not as if there's been an argument over. Okay, maybe a slight disagreement on immigration, but generally speaking, most of what reforms stand for, that's not the hub of this argument, right?
Exactly. Yes. You've got lots of lightweights coming on your programme saying that they're cancelling their membership.
Yeah.
Where are they going to go? I just don't understand it. There's just no alternative.
And I think that is the point that is perhaps to reform's benefit in this, that there isn't really alternative. Kemi Badenoch is not yet substantially carving herself out as a great leader. I think she's got a long way to go. I'm not even sure she can really achieve that kind of status as being that sort of mesmeric, powerful orator. Maybe, I could be wrong, when she was in the cabinet. What big old difference, big chasm between being a cabinet minister who's good at the dispatch box and being the prime minister or prime minister in waiting. We will wait and see. Fran, thank you very much indeed for that. On this very point, let's get a voice note from Claire.
This reform fiasco is all to do with egos and nothing about working for our country. It's about time the party stopped this infighting and look at the longer picture. This country is on its knees. And I think this taking sides is pathetic.
But do Reform need Rupert Lowe back in there? They survived the kind of Ben Habib moment when it was widely reckoned that Ben was, quite clearly one of the most gifted and popular parts of their party. But he was sort of ostracised, fair enough, didn't become an MP. No reason why he wouldn't have become one next time around, and couldn't have still been a big voice on the media, official spokesman or something like that. Ben would have been great. But sharing the limelight or the love of limelight, is it the limelight of love or the love of limelight, isn't something these guys do particularly well, it seems. No politician does, but you take the point. David's in Glasgow. What do you got for us, David? Hello.
Hi, Ian. Yes, I think we need to look at this from the Scotland perspective.
Okay.
And I say that because in the next 14 months, Scotland's going to have its election for the Scottish Parliament. And that could be critical in trying to test what support Reform has got within the country. Yeah? So down to your question, where do the voters go with Reform? I think the problem is with Reform currently at the moment is that voters are leaving Reform. We've seen recently in the last few days, for instance, Richard Tice coming up to Glasgow, good reception, but very little support from what I could see from the party machine. And that tends to be the problem.
I know that Howard Cox had a similar sense when he was standing for London Mayor, that there didn't seem to be a lot of support coming from the party. And Richard Tice is the deputy leader of the party and one of the kind of mainstays of the party.
They had a potential big coup, with these two Conservative councillors defecting to Reform. Yeah. And you would expect with any credible party, to have its systems in place and briefings, etc. It just felt when I actually physically was there and I was watching Richard and amongst the scrum of reporters and that, that he was left to his own devices. That's just what it appeared to me. Was the briefings didn't seem to be there.
But then he is the party, isn't he? Richard Tice is as part of it as anybody could be. You'd think.
Yes, but he's an individual. Yeah, and within that party, you should have support. And I think this whole thing again with Reform is disappointing because Reform could have been second in Scotland. That was the projections. They were looking to sort of get close to, i.e. overtaking Labour, for instance.
But won't that still happen though, David? In terms of if you go to the ballot box. It's a bit like when people voted for the Tories, even though they didn't, they were no longer what they thought they were going to be, but they still voted for them. Clearly not in enough numbers at the last election. Do you think instinctively, faced with that choice, Labour, Tory, SNP in the case of Scotland, and Reform. If you're already a Reform convert, you're still going to vote for them.
Not from what I can see in the grassroots, no, because
Interesting.
I think Nigel, for instance, has never been that popular within Scotland. And that's why the Richard Tice effect has always been quite interesting, because he has been seen to be popular.
Got it.
And then when you bring Donald Trump into the equation with Nigel Farage, the popularity decreases even further.
Yeah. David, interesting point. Thank you for that. It's slightly countered here from Nigel, who says, I will be voting Reform in the local elections in May. The spat between Reform and Rupert Lowe will have no impact on this, and all this conversation is doing is allowing Labour and Tories to say nothing which is to their detriment. For example, less people are voting for Labour and the Tories than they have done historically. In 1983, 72% of the voters turned out, with 21.5 million votes for Labour and the Tories. And that was in 1983. In 2024, this was reduced to 60% of voters, with 16.5 million votes for the two parties. Politics is changing, and those that could bring it back like to wear blinkers. Voters are not voting in the numbers pre-83, with perhaps the exception of the Brexit referendum. People have lost confidence in our two main parties, elected parties wholesale. There's no quick fix for either of them. It's a good point about numbers, and the July election, I can't remember what the turnout was, but it was grim, wasn't it? It really surprising, because there was that real sense that this was going to be, if ever there was a party where people, ever there was an election where people would vote in large numbers, it was going to be this one. 7th of July, 2024, 4th of July, 2024. Never happened. We didn't get large numbers, so there's a sort of an apathy there. I know things are diluted somewhat. The Lib Dems are a bigger presence than they would have been a few years back. And then, of course, you've got Reform, even the Green Party. I know it sounds weird, but it's a party that didn't exist, certainly back in the 80s. 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to more calls in a few moments' time. And also, what's going on BBC Arabic, the BBC channel, BBC Arabic. There are some extraordinary claims about their editorial misgivings, shall we say, and shortcomings. We'll have details on that coming next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is talk, just gone 25 to 3. Loads of calls coming in on that. Certainly that trigger question. Will Reform UK voters stand with Rupert Lowe or the party? I think the feeling that many voters have got is just a little bit of, real desperation, in the sense that, really, we've come to this situation, and just as the party are really rising high, a battle takes place between such a high-profile figure in that world, in Rupert Lowe, who is clearly a high-profile figure, and man with an ego out of control, Nigel Farage, man with an ego out of control, Lee Anderson, whoever, regardless of whatever reasoning might be, the upshot is that here we have a party with 5 MPs now battling with a man sent off. And then the other MP, the younger one, whose name escapes me, who can't really give any interviews because of issues of his past, he's about as useful as a handbrake on a canoe. So it's like 3 MPs. How do you feel as a Reform voter? We'll come back to those calls in just a moment. First this, Kemi Badenoch has demanded wholesale reform of the BBC Arabic channel after a report accused it of appalling anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias. The Tory leader wrote to the Director General Tim Davie weeks after warning her party could withdraw support for the licence fee if bias concerns remain unsolved. The call comes amid controversy over a Gaza documentary, of course, which we talked about a lot, aired by the broadcaster, narrated by the son of a senior Hamas official. Let's speak to the freelance journalist Nicole Lampert, who's also an activist against anti-Semitism. Nicole, good afternoon to you.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, this is one of those reports, when you read something, you think there must be a typo in this, that it can't be that bad, surely, and then you start to go, oh, actually, it really can be that bad. At a time, and again, just not to talk specifically about the Gaza documentary, but when you look at that, you think, surely, somewhere along the line, somebody would have spotted this. Surely at a time when the BBC for the last good few years have been under the spotlight for this very accusation. Everything will be double, triple, quadruply checked by the hour over there at BBC HQ, whether you're working on flipping Watchdog, the news, or indeed BBC Arabic channel. And it's that last one that's the focus of this, Nicole, because the list of blunders, and that sort of slightly cheapens it, but anti-Semitic blunders are off the scale here.
Yeah, and these are all connected, really. So people have been complaining about BBC Arabic and their output for many years. Since October 7, we've seen in particular how bad it is, but they call Hamas the resistance, they call Israelis settlers wherever they are in Israel. They frequently have terrorists on without telling them what they've done or even lauding them. And this is all the BBC, this is all being paid for us, either through our licence fee or it's also paid for by the Foreign Office. So I've been looking into the BBC in particular on this area for the last few weeks for a piece I'm writing. And what I'm getting back from people is that, so not only is that going on and it's being exported to 38 million people in the Arab world, but the attitudes of these people and BBC staffers have told me that these are activists who are actively working against Israel. Some of that is feeding back to the BBC that we see in this country, in that BBC Arabic's journalists are seen as specialists. So if there's something going on, then they will speak to someone in that department, or they're frequently on BBC television. But we've got BBC Arabic people who celebrated on October 7 and they're still in a job. Yeah.
And that was one of the parts of this investigation that didn't surprise me in many respects. The only thing I thought, given the current environment we're in, by now you'd at the very least, say to those people, right, I'm afraid you can't really work here anymore. It couldn't be more against our editorial policy. It's already a policy of the BBC that if you get too political or get political at all, particularly in those areas of journalism, then there's no place for you. That's what they've been telling us. But apparently there really is. And Another shocking element to this, as you rightly said, Nicole, at the beginning, interviewing, I think PLO leader was interviewed a number of times. But one of the most damning parts was that I think there was 80 occasions in just a matter of months where they had to on-air redact and apologise for something they got wrong.
Yeah, this is after kind of immediately after October 7, and so there have been many more since. But in the months after, they were, as I kind of said, that they frequently talk about the Israeli settlements, Israel as settlements, even in kind of what's deemed Israel proper, even by our Foreign Office. There was even denial of October 7 behaviour, even though Hamas put it out. So it's and there's constantly referring to Hamas as the resistance. Yeah. When although I'm sure you've discussed and everyone's discussed the fact that the BBC won't call them terrorists, but calling them the resistance is very much not a neutral.
Well, that is anything but neutral. But objectively, that is definitely not a neutral way to describe somebody. And I also think what's at the heart of this, Nicole, which is the ongoing problem with the BBC in lots of areas, but specifically in this area, is that when we have that phrase, they don't learn. And the reason they don't learn is because the very people that should be charged with putting this right don't believe it. They genuinely can't see the problem. And that's the issue, isn't it? You could sit there in a room barking this stuff hours on end. They would not see the problem. So they don't think they've done anything wrong.
Yeah, that is the big problem. And that's what led to the Gaza documentary. When I spoke to BBC staff, they said it was always going to end this way, with us paying the son of a Hamas official, because we had told them month after month. And they tell me, they say they appear to listen and they say nice things, and then nothing is ever done. Yeah. And last week they were the BBC chairman and the BBC Director General were in front of MPs at the Select Committee. And even then, it felt like Tim Davie, the Director General, didn't really want to take on board what had happened. It felt a bit more like Samir Shah did understand and realised that it was a bigger issue. But one of the problems is just there's a kind of arrogance there that they will not recognise that there is a problem. And until they recognise a problem, there will not be a solution to it.
Well, the BBC said, this is their statement, which you may be familiar with these words, Nicole. They said they will reply. It would respond to Kemi Badenoch's letter about not supporting the licence fee. They say the BBC is fully committed to reporting the conflict impartially and to the highest standards of journalism, it stated. BBC News Arabic plays a vital role in our reporting from the Middle East, and this week we were part of the team that won a prestigious Royal Television Society Award for Gaza 101, which gave audiences rare access to work of ambulance crews in the region. And I thought that was a joke when they put that in. They actually won an award. This place won an award, for goodness sake, despite this plethora of ongoing list of examples. We've just talked about the major ones here. There are others of where they've got it horribly wrong. How would you be invited onto the red carpet when your CV looks like that?
Well, this is one of the problems, and the fact that the BBC won't acknowledge that all of the output that's coming out of Gaza has been censored by Hamas. Hamas is not just a terrorist group, but it's a fascist group as well, which means that any journalists who dare to criticise it are imprisoned and tortured. So really, everything that comes out of Gaza should come with a health warning that this has been censored. So that should be the starting point. And yes, it is ridiculous that the RTS has given awards, and the RTS also got into trouble for specifically lauding a Hamas mouthpiece as one of their rising stars. Yeah. So unfortunately, because it's the BBC and because the BBC is one of our most trusted brands, that's what feeds into the system where because it's the BBC and people trust the BBC, they therefore trust that it's coming from the right place. But if it's coming from BBC Arabic, and numerous people told me that it's run by activists there, then it's not coming from a reliable place or a trusted place or a place that we should trust.
Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely, and how this can carry on, I've got no idea. But you know, and will heads roll? Probably not, and that is the really sad reality of where we're at. Nicole, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you for coming on. Nicole Lampert, the journalist and activist against anti-Semitism, and you just heard there's a catalogue of errors and blunders over there at the BBC Arabic channel. I mean, it's not even. Every now and again you see a blunder, an editorial blunder, you go, well, there's a kind of one-off, or there's, you know, there was an inexperienced person was given a job, they should have double-checked it, or it doesn't happen very much. I mean, to have to apologise 80 times in a matter of months for getting stuff wrong is bad enough. Having people on your payroll who endorsed the 7th of October, these are not one-off situations. Interviewing head honchos from the world of terrorism and hardly referencing that. I mean, this is not objective, good journalism. This is very, very bad journalism. And in this particular respect, it's really dangerous. And what makes it worse, when you confront them, they go, oh, we haven't done anything. They genuinely don't think they have. And that ingrained in the kind of slightly weird world of how this story of the Middle East should be reported, that they don't see it. 0344 499 1000.
We know that this man is a gun-toting, jihad-loving, Jew-hating lunatic that is now wandering the streets. How many of them are coming in here? We have no idea. Yeah. What we do know is that the consistent pattern of everybody that shows up on these boats is that they are fighting age men from war-torn regions who have a much higher rate of committing crime in the very relatively short period of time they're in this country than do any other category of migrants.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 10 to 3. Let's get a little more on what is happening in that incident involving an oil tanker colliding with a cargo ship just off the coast of East Yorkshire. A rescue operation is underway. It continues specifically off the coast of Hull. The boss of Port of Grimsby says that more than 30 people have been brought ashore alive. However, some crew members are still believed to be unaccounted for. Autopilot is said to be a possible cause of the crash. Let's speak with David McFarlane, Director of Maritime Risk and Safety Consultants Limited. Good afternoon to you, David.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, this is clearly a terrible and devastating event, what has happened here. Very rare, I suppose that should be pointed out. Suggestions that autopilot could be the cause of a crash like this. What are you making of the rather distressing, very powerful images that we're seeing?
It is difficult to stand on autopilot. An autopilot is a piece of electronics, a very simple, straightforward item, but it's set up by a human being, and it can be taken away at any point, and then the ship can be manually controlled. The thing that gets me about this is there should be never an occasion that two ships collide, especially when one is apparently a tanker plowing straight into her. There's been collision regulations in place since 1972. They're there for a reason, and they're there to ensure that no two ships should collide. Incidents every single year happen about two ships actually hitting each other worldwide. So these things do unfortunately happen. It's very unusual for a ship to hit a tanker at anchor. And so we have to ask the questions, what was being done on both vessels as far as a lookout was concerned, because the collision regulations do state that a proper and effective lookout must be maintained at all times.
So the ship anchored and the collision happened from there, right? So one was anchored, the other was moving.
Partly so. For all I know, perhaps the tanker was starting to pick up her anchor, going to her next port.
Yeah.
Maybe she was manoeuvring. We haven't heard that one way or the other yet. So we're only speculating that she was actually fixed at anchor.
Sure.
So we have to wait and see what the investigation comes out with. Certainly... Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, we are hearing that 30 people have been brought ashore alive, which is the fact that people appear to have survived this, because you look at the images and this looks like just a complete inferno in the sea. And you struggle to think how anybody could have come out of that, but it appears clearly there are evacuation procedures in place. And we have 30 people that have been brought ashore alive. Some crew members still believed to be unaccounted for, but it is early days. But one would assume then there is despite how awful and horrendous this looks, there is a procedure to get personnel off a ship or a tanker should something like this occur.
Absolutely. I mean, both ships' crews will have been drilled and exercised in abandoning ship frequently. Every couple of weeks probably, and these things should come as second nature. The immediate reaction to abandon ship would probably have been a major decision by both captains. The first role of thought is to try and fight any fire that's on board, but as you can see from the images, the fire is obviously beyond the capabilities of the ship now. But it would appear to me that what I'm looking at, and I can't be clear, but what I'm looking at is the container ship seems to have the major fire on the ship.
Yeah.
Between both vessels, you can see the various boxes that are ignited.
Yeah.
And we don't know what the container ship was carrying. Containers can carry anything from simple electronic equipment, which are non-hazardous, up to explosives, TNT, lithium batteries.
David, we seem to have lost you at that point, but at a timely moment. But thank you, David McFarlane, Director of Maritime Risk and Safety Consultants Limited, with us on the programme. We will, of course, update you on that story, but it is, the imagery is incredibly powerful and disturbing. And, you know, any big fire, even if the underpinning is that, you know, nobody's been hurt, etc., is bewildering to look at. And this is just off the coast of East Yorkshire. So you've got a cargo ship, oil tanker, colliding. It's never going to look good, but we understand that the 32 casualties that have been brought ashore are alive. And that's the only information we have. We do understand there are some personnel yet to be accounted for, but I think it is stressed that it's still early days. Let's go back to your calls. Just gone 5 to 3. Phil is in Hull. How are you doing, Phil?
Fine, thanks, Ian. Yeah,
good.
Enjoying the show.
Thank you.
On this Farage law debacle, people are already taking sides about this is this and this is that.
Yep.
Actually, I'm quite impressed with Law, but he is the subject, whether you like it or not, of 3 separate investigations. So people are presuming that this or presuming then that, and no one knows. Already he's been debunked on one thing where he's quoted this KC as virtually supporting him, and she's come out and said,
I never said anything of the sort. Yes. I mean, yeah, you're right. And there is that. And, you know, did he say to the chairman, God, I'm surprised I don't give you a smack? You know, was it said colloquially, or if that was the sort of thing that might have been said? It's hard to tell, isn't it? We don't really know.
Excuse me, but as I say, the parliamentary people are involved about the 2 situations in the offices. The police are involved, rightly or wrongly. As you say, I mean, you could have said you want a good smack. You know, I mean, verbal assault or whatever.
Not a great look, but you think in that world, do people really call the old bill over that unless you want to, you know, properly ruin someone?
I'm not, you know, but the thing I'm trying not to do is to take sides.
Agreed, you are completely correct that, you know, a lot of the information we really don't know. There was one bit of info from Andrew Bridgen, the former Tory MP, I don't know if you saw that, who said the plot thickens. One of my former parliamentary aides went on to work for Rupert Lowe. She's one of the staff involved in these allegations against him. She's told me that her original complaint had nothing to do with Rupert and was actually related to the actions of another member of staff. He says, I have permission to post this tweet, but I hear you, Phil. Thank you for that, Phil in Hull. Right, we've got time just before the news. The Voice of Doom. The Voice of Doom is back. I think it's day 3, possibly, of this. Have a listen to the voice.
What would you have done?
Who is it? I've forgotten who it is now, so even I don't know. Have another listen.
What would you have done?
Don't call in, there is no prize, by the way, if you think you know who that is. 87222, if you fancy having a crack at it. If we get a right answer, we'll tell you after the news. If not, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here's the voice again.
What would you have done?
Oh, man alive, I can't remember. Can we hear it again, Amy?
What would you have done?
87222, if you've got an inkling as to who the heck that is. Maybe we will reveal all on the other side of the headlines. More comment on the way from you as well. Gillian, no fan of the DUP, but at the height of their popularity, Ian Paisley was the orator and Peter Robinson was the strategist. Nigel Farage doesn't need to do both things. Details on that and more comment from you on the way next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of Common Sense. Coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Now, the row at the top of Reform UK has escalated as Nigel Farage and suspended MP Rupert Lowe trade fresh blows over bullying allegations. Mr Lowe denies any wrongdoing, it should be said. It is begging the rather perhaps obvious question here in terms of where this story goes. Will Reform UK voters stand with Rupert Lowe, or will it be the party? We'll have more from you shortly. Also this afternoon, lab-grown meat, dairy and sugar could be on the UK shelves within 2 years, with the Food Standards Agency exploring ways to fast-track approval for these products. How are you feeling about a bit of lab-made steak? Some wagyu from a test tube, perhaps? Details on that. And a seventh person has been killed by an XL bully dog in the past year, despite the government's ban on the breed. We'll look at that story in more detail in just a couple of moments' time. 0344 499 1000. Shall we get back to the voice of doom then? The voice of doom, it was actually day 2 today. I think I said day 3 before the news. This is the mystery voice with a political angle to it. Here it is. This is the voice we're trying to see if somebody out there can identify.
What would you have done?
Who is that? Oh, I've just remembered who it is, yeah. Peter Mandelson, no. David Cameron, it is not. There's a little bit of a Cameron-esque thing in there. Jonathan Ashworth, it isn't. Michael Heseltine, no. James McMurdoch, no. Jonathan Gullis, no. In fact, we don't have a right answer. Bingo, it rolls over to tomorrow. So around about 10 to 3 tomorrow, the voice of doom returns. Let's have another listen, Amy.
What would you have done?
Store that in your memory bank, ready to unleash a correct answer on us tomorrow at about the same time. Now, a 19-year-old woman in Bristol has become the 7th person killed by an XL bully dog in the last year. This is despite the government's ban on the breed. XL bullies have been linked to nearly 2/3 of fatal dog attacks since the ban came into force last year. So we've got groups including the RSPCA and the Dogs Trust have criticised the ban, arguing it won't stop the attacks and pointing to a lack of data to support the move. Let's speak with Niall Barnes, owner of NB Dog Training. Niall, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
So what do you think is happening here? Is this about the fact that people are ignoring the ban, or is it the fact that, you know, maybe some of these people's dog is legit and isn't a banned, has been given a licence for it? It's a sketchy picture at the moment, but it does appear that whatever it is someone's trying to do, it ain't working.
Yeah, I mean, we had this discussion a year ago. I was on your show, and I said that this was going to be a thing. There might be a reduction in attacks, and there was, but not a complete sort of removal of attacks. And I think it's the people that you're putting a ban in on are people that don't respect other laws either. So the dogs that are attacking people are owned by people who would be breaking other laws if it wasn't for this dog.
Yeah.
So you're not addressing the root cause of the issue.
I mean, this is an obvious question, Niall, but why would somebody want to own an XL bully?
People like the kind of dogs they like. I say this a lot, but like dogs really reflect their owners, and certain people have an affinity for certain dogs. For me, it's Border Collies, it's Shepherds, it's Labradors. For other people, they love Spaniels. Some people, one of my staff, absolutely adores big, sort of muscular dogs like XL Bullies, Dobermans, Rottweilers. They love that kind of dog. And some people get them because they're a status symbol and they're a guard dog that isn't actually trained to be a guard dog.
Yeah. I think there's some of that, isn't there? I mean, I have to say, I saw a fellow while out dog walking who did at least have the sense to walk over the road. I don't know what breed it was, but it was flipping enormous, this thing. It had more muscles than in places that most people haven't even got places. I mean, it was extraordinary. And he was talking to me, and he was apologising for the dog barking. You know, he said, look, I know it's intimidating, but it's a complete legitimate breed. And he went through this conversation. It was very decent of him. I'm walking with a little cockapoo who's thinking, what the heck's going on here? This is Armageddon about to happen. But I looked at this dog, sort of 20 feet across the road, and I kind of agree with that analysis now. There is something majestic about them, even though I know some people will only project a look of kind of evil and aggression and violence because, you know, they can take your throat out if they want to. We get that. But there is some, I can see that there is a genuine attraction. They're physically, they're firm, they're tough, they're big. And for many people, that will be the kind of dog they want. But whichever way you slice it, there's an irredeemable reality here, isn't there? That if that dog goes bad, as distinct from my little cockapoo going bad, it only, you know, I'm going to win the fight with my cockapoo. I ain't going to win the fight with one of these things.
Yeah, the genetics of it can't be ignored, but they are. People just think dogs are dogs, and they're not. There's different kinds of dogs that we've bred over generations and generations for certain characteristics that make them better at certain jobs than others. Spaniels, we bred for the nose. Collies, we bred for the herding drive. We bred them for all these things. We created every breed out there. They didn't just come along. We made them by selecting for characteristics, physical or behavioral. And sometimes you breed for size and you will bring out more of a propensity for aggression and a leaning towards aggression and intense behavior. And if you breed that dog badly, which is massively, massively important and is happening, was happening at scale with XL bullies before the ban, you're going to put more risk out into the world. And if you hand that badly bred, genetically inclined dog to someone who doesn't care about the consequences of their actions, people die.
Yeah. And yet there is that very real sense that, as you rightly said at the beginning, you know, people who own these dogs, some of them quite like the fact that it's aggressive. They like the fact that, oh, it protects me and all the resort a bit of that, you know, it's got my back, you know, and there's some sort of kudos in having a dog that can kill.
Yeah. People don't understand enough about the dogs that they have. They think they know the dog, but so many people don't. And I say it every time I have these interviews, but there should be a minimum level of sort of understanding and knowledge that you have to own something that can cause harm like that.
Yeah.
I have to pass a test to drive my car. I should have to pass a test to have something that has the capacity to kill or seriously change someone's life through injury.
Yeah.
And the barrier to entry at the minute is how much cash I've got in my pocket. I can go and get a dog capable of catastrophic harm in the next hour and a half if I really wanted to, with enough cash in my pocket, and that shouldn't be the case.
Indeed. And what is the answer to this problem then? Because there's clearly there's a body of evidence building, a fatal body of evidence building rather quickly here. Seven people in the past year to be killed by one breed is just, you know, tells us something is wrong. My fear is that even if you banned this breed altogether and outbred them and made sure they couldn't, you know, some were put down or whatever, the kind of person that wants one will still somehow find a way of having one.
It'll be a different breed 5 years from now if we don't change the overall legislation around dogs. It should be a restricted thing that you have to have a qualification or at least a, you know, like passing a driving test to own, and you agree that I'm going to follow these rules. But then the consequences need to be stricter and actually followed up on. We saw the lad from Love Island had a couple of instances with his dog and he wasn't following instructions. He was actually fined quite heavily and it was quite public. And I kind of applauded that because it's the first thing I've seen. Not that it's the only thing. It's the first thing I've seen that said, we are going to make an example publicly and actually put in a serious fine to this person to warn off other people and who think, oh, nothing happens if I get caught. Because what I said last year was, it's a slap on the wrist for the owners, if anything. And hopefully this is a sign that they're actually going to put tougher consequences in for people who don't follow the rules and who have out-of-control dogs that they aren't managing and handling responsibly.
Yeah. Spot on. Niall, thank you. Great to have you with us again. Niall Barnes, owner of NB Dog Training. Look them up. They do a lot of work in this area. I don't know what the answer is. A mate of mine had a couple of dogs recently that were completely legit, cost a fortune as well. And he really couldn't keep hold of them. He decided that, you know, one of them was so fiercely loyal to him that if you just came close, this thing wanted a piece of you. It just didn't function in any other way. It had just an inbuilt antenna that said, my job is to protect this man at all. It would sit in the garden and just sit there on the lawn looking out in case, you know, of intruders. It was kind of in its blood to do that. And it was a beautiful dog in a curious way. I mean, the colours of it, just the anatomical makeup of dogs like that. But you wouldn't really want to stick your head near it and give it a little pet for fear of what might happen. And it was too much. He said, I can't really do this anymore, so I'm going to have to find a different owner for them and maybe different circumstances. And he had the garden and everything that goes with it, so there was none of that going on. Just the realisation that he'd essentially got the wrong make of dog. 0344 499 1000. Lots of talk on Reform. One comes in here. Afternoon, Ian. Reform UK is not Farage or Lowe. Reform is us, the British public. Whatever happens is irrelevant. We want our country back by... and that's really where it ends. Because then I think the text gets a little messed up. But I take the point. Whoever sent that, there's no name given on that one. Gary says, Ian, people criticise Nigel Farage for not listening to others in his party and want things done his way. But what is inescapable is that he's probably been one of the most effective politicians this country has ever seen. And like it or not, politicians are only any good if they are effective. I'm pretty sure that if you ask the Conservatives who they'd rather see gone from Reform, Farage or Lowe, the honest answer would be that they would rather see the back of Farage because he's the one with the profile and the traction with the public. I think that's spot on. I mean, yeah, Rupert was a great player and did, you know, a very skilled job that, again, that straight talking, you know, I don't care about saying the right fluffy words, I'm going to tell it like it is. But I think Farage still, on the Olympic podium, Farage would be there still with the gold medal, wouldn't he? This comes in from, in fact, it's a voice note from Jackie.
I'm a Reform member, and what I don't understand with this spat with Rupert Lowe is that Rupert Lowe and Nigel worked together in the European Parliament when Nigel was the leader of the party there. So he knows Nigel's style. I suspect that what has happened is since he's come into the UK Parliament, he's got a massive following on social media. He's on media outlets, left, right and centre. And I think his ego might have got a little bit too big to be managed.
And I guess the difference as well, Jackie, thank you for that, the difference between when the European Parliament, the MEPs and the Brexit Party and that kind of moment where they were there for, you know, a very short period of time before we voted to leave the EU. But now it's business, isn't it? It's real bit. They're in Westminster. There's 5 of them. Big momentum around Reform. Incredible success at the last general election. Look at those seats that they came second in as well. That's a massive part of this story. Over 4 million people voting for a party that didn't exist half an hour ago. Huge story. Nigel in Peebles on this very point. Nigel, how are you doing?
I'm well.
Good.
I think Nigel Farage has got his head in the sand if he thinks this is going to go away without it being properly dealt with. I put to him last night an email that they need to have a live YouTube event chaired by the KC who robustly questions Zia, Nigel himself, Rupert and Lee, and then we, the voters, can all see who is the problem, because one of them is a problem here, and we're all guessing at who it might be. If, for example, Rupert Lowe is as aggressive as he's being made out to be, that would come out in live, robust questioning, and we'd see the problem. If they do it behind closed doors and Rupert is dismissed, half of us will all be thinking they've made the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And I think the problem comes back. I said to an email to Ben Habib back last September when he was on GB News complaining about the Constitution, I said, you may well be right on the Constitution, but please keep it private. He came back to me, nice of him, and he said, yes, I agree, but I'm very disappointed by Yusuf being not truthful on GB News when he said the best legal minds are working on the document. They were not. The document is the one I rejected a year and a half ago. I'm afraid the only way to force the issue is in the public domain. Now, that's what Rupert has said. He can't get action outside of having to go public. I thought when he went to the Daily Mail, he'd made a mistake in going public. But now they've all gone public, and I think the only way to put this to bed so voters can have confidence back in Reform again is to say, OK, we all sit behind a table. It's a live YouTube event. Anyone can watch it. The Casey will question us all, and let's get the truth.
Well, I guess the risk with that, Nigel, and you're quite right, because I think that would be a great way to do it in one respect, but the risk with that is that you've got two men there who, you know, if one of them walks out of this live event, I mean, that could, the optics then compound this regrettable story even more.
Not necessarily, because the right one might walk out and then everyone else might move on. I mean, the fact is the Conservatives haven't got any really good players at the moment.
No.
But Reform have got Richard Tice, good man. Nigel Farage, good man. Rupert Lowe, good man. They're all strong characters. It's what's needed in a political party, but they're not managing it properly. Now, someone somewhere has tripped up. It may be that Zia coming in as chairman has caused disruption. It may be that Rupert Lowe thinks he's more successful and he should have more of a say, or his view should carry. Nobody really knows, but it will come out if it is properly questioned. And I think because they've all put it in the public domain, to try and deal with it behind closed doors now would be a mistake. Nigel Farage came back to me yesterday on my email and he said, "Please see my latest article in today's Telegraph. Thank you for writing to me. I hope this clarifies events which have led to the current situation." Well, it doesn't clarify events.
No.
All he said in the Telegraph is what he thinks.
Yeah, there's more, which puts more fog into the story, not less. Listen, Nigel, great call. Thank you, Nigel in Peebles on Reform UK. Maddie says this whole debacle with Reform is unpleasant and not unexpected. The ego of Nigel Farage and Richard Tice is what appears to be the problem. Rupert Lowe has proven to be an excellent MP. He serves his constituents at the same time as addressing the concerns of the whole country. Why would the party have an issue with someone who is doing this? The chairman of Reform is extremely unsuitable and is appearing to have the objectives of the main parties, therefore betraying the promise Reform set out and why millions voted and put their weight behind them. Extremely disappointing and a massive betrayal of millions. A big rethink of Reform is required. Also, the "that lot" comment will not be forgotten either. And we remember who that refers to. Thank you, Maddie, for that. I don't know about the ego of Richard Tice. I don't think Richard is certain. I mean, I've known him for a while. He certainly has never come across like that to me. He's again another very successful businessman. He's run a lot. He's succeeded a lot. He's had his ups and downs. He knows how things work. He knows about the mechanics of running stuff, and I think he brings a lot to the table in a very calm and sober manner. But I don't think you can underestimate the ego of Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe are well known. You speak to anybody at Westminster, you know, Rupert would be anything but straightforward as a character. That doesn't mean he's unsuitable. It just means he is, you know, his own man. He thinks autonomously, even though he's in a party. It's like, no, you can't do that, Rupert. You're in a party now. So I can see the errors that he might have made there. But of course, Nigel also, you know, is a man with and when we use the word ego in this context, it's not a pejorative, just basic observations. If you didn't have somebody with a bit of an ego in this world, nobody would be doing the job, for goodness sake. 0344 499 1000. When it comes to what is going on this story, will Reform voters stand with Rupert Lowe or with the party? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Those people who are actually fleecing the system are taking money away from the very people that you just talked about. You know, the disabled, people who are elderly, people who are, through no fault of their own, have ended up in the situations that they're in. And I really feel for them, because actually they're being done in by a system which people are gaming. I mean, on TikTok alone, there's these things called sickfluencers, where they show people how to get round the system and which words to use. It's pretty disgusting, to be honest with you, Julie.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, 0344 499 1000. One here from Danny in West Yorkshire, who says, I'm a Reform member and extremely disappointed. If you have a look at the Reform UK membership numbers, they're now going in reverse. People are cancelling memberships over this. If Rupert Lowe doesn't get the whip back sharpish, it's over for Reform. He is the most talented MP in that party by a long way. Every indication, Danny, is that he ain't going back to Reform anytime soon, if at all. That seems to be where we're at on this. Stranger things have happened. Reform will get over it, but it means they're operating largely with 3 active MPs, because the 4th one has a bit of a backstory that would probably follow him around any interview he would do. So you've got Lee Anderson, Richard Tice and Nigel Farage. But again, I said at the beginning, the very words I used at the beginning of this was that this is a party with 5 MPs. I mean, you could literally fit them in the back of a black taxi. But they found themselves almost leading on the debate on immigration, on money wasted in government, on DEI, on gender madness. The party never existed a little while ago, and 5 MPs are punching at such an extraordinary rate of knots with incredible regularity on big issues. And again, making a greater noise and being more persuasive than MPs who've been in the House of Commons for 25 years, who've never said boo to a flipping goose. Rupert Lowe was incredible at that, and bringing, asking relevant questions, often connected to things like immigration and housing and the correlation between the two. Incredible work. So why don't more constituency MPs not do that? I think, look, forget whether you vote for Reform, even if you hate Reform, you have to look at somebody like Rupert and go, this was a diligent fella. And it might be a bit clunky to work alongside, it might be tricky to work alongside. You could say that about a lot of people, but he was doing the job. So to see the fallout from that, if you're a Reform voter or a Reform member, I think is rather devastating. We'll talk to John in Crewe in just a second. Before that, let's get a voice note on this very story from Ken.
I am bitterly disappointed at this spat within Reform. They don't seem to realise that the vast majority of Reformers' votes are on loan from the Tories. And with the fickle nature that the electorate is, they are very likely to lose all of them back to the Conservatives. And the 5 MPs they've got will be lucky to hang on to their seats if this does as much damage as I suspect it might.
Yeah, and, look, strange things happen in politics. Do you remember when the Canadian Conservatives were utterly obliterated? I mean, properly obliterated a number of years ago, and it looked like there was no comeback for them. I mean, our Conservatives had an absolute spanking on July the 4th, politically. Not a pretty picture for them. They've got a leader who's kind of just about doing all right, not good enough, but things change. Once that perception of Badenoch alters, if they start to become a party that comes up with alternatives and throws out debates and issues and questions like you're seeing for Reform, and they've still got 111 Tory MPs or something, there's still a lot of them. They could cause some damage. They could capitalise on this. John is in Crewe on this subject. John, good afternoon to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ian. And I don't think many sensible people will return to a party that's proved over 14 years to be corrupt and incompetent. But as far as this particular issue goes, I'm afraid Rupert Lowe, I think, is out of the party and finished. What is never realised, I think Nigel Farage has learned lessons from Donald Trump. And in his first session, Donald Trump had a lot of cuckoos in the nest, you could say, people who were against him.
Yeah.
What he's learned in the meantime is that you have to have a team playing together.
Yeah.
And if I can take an analogy from football, just down the road from me, there was a very famous footballer by the name of Gordon Banks.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if Gordon
One
Banks,
of the greats.
Definitely, and one of the nicest people he could meet, actually. But nevertheless, if Gordon Banks had said to the manager or trainer, whatever they call these days, he wanted to play as centre forward, I think a good manager would have said, no, your place is in the goals. Now, when you look at Lowe, basically, he is not used to receiving orders. He gives orders.
True.
And he can't go his own way.
But what about the accusation, though, John, that Nigel Farage is cut from exactly the same cloth?
The difference is this. Nigel Farage is far more canny, more professional. He understands the messy business of politics far better than the rest of them. And he's proved to be right. I can remember leaders going back to Attlee, I'm that old, but Farage, in my opinion, we're so lucky to have somebody so outstanding. He's right on almost everything you think about. He was right on HS2, immigration, COVID, you name it. And I think what the difference is, if you think Rupert Lowe, he was on TV by himself a while ago, claiming, as an example, MPs are underpaid. They should get $400,000 a year or more. Now, that may or may not be the case. And the same with Tommy Robinson. He may be, and he's got a lot of good points. But the main point is this. There are many people lining up, particularly the BBC, the media and so on, looking for any openings to criticise. And if he'd said those things as a member of the party, they would immediately jump on them again. It needs somebody leading, and Farage is a leader, not so much a wishy-washy sort of manager who says, you follow my way. If you've got anything to say, do it in private. And I think Rupert Lowe was absolutely wrong what he said in the Mail. You should no way should you have done that, no matter what.
But I think when you are Rupert Lowe, businessman, former football chairman, farmer, multi-millionaire, you don't really listen to anybody, do you? I would imagine that's the case. I know what you're saying, John, is that I'm afraid you need to learn to listen because, you know, like a player saying, you know, I want to be a striker this week, boss. It ain't just going to happen. It's a great call, John. Thank you very much indeed for that. James in Devon says Farage is the reason, along with the mess over immigration that the Tories and the current charlatans reform are flying. But he's too autocratic, big ego. He's a party leader, not a dictator. Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe are excellent, clever people that speak sense, yet they've been sidelined. Also, is it risky giving their main contributor such a prominent position? Reform will now win seats without quality, such as Habib and Lowe. Come on, Nigel, have a drink down the pub with them both. I think that's... More than anything, I think that it's that last point. I did say it to our very first caller. The bit that I think has maybe stuck in the throats of many is the fact that this Reform were the party that didn't do this stuff. They didn't go running to the HR department because there was a bit of an issue in the office. They didn't have public rows or send out a glossy press release. They went, do you know what, we've had a bit of a row. It's not pretty. A couple of us aren't, you know, the flavour of the month to the other. We're going to go down the pub, have several brown ales, bag of peanuts, and then come out and go, do you know what, we sorted it out. I think it's that. This doesn't feel very reformy to have the old bill called and all sorts of other things. We wait and see, as a previous contributor said. We don't know the full details of all the allegations here, so we do have to wait and see. My guess is they will come to nothing, but the damage is done. I think the damage, if that is the way we will end up viewing this, was perhaps meant to be permanent. But, you know, political parties survive many things, trials, tribulations, all sorts of bumps and hurdles that are laid across the path of a political journey are all, you know, part and parcel of it, I guess. They will survive it. But you do, at the moment, need those strong, persuasive voices. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Couple of curious stories that have just dropped here at Talk Towers. I'll bring you those in a few moments' time. More comment from you on the way as well. Very busy at this end today. Now, lab-grown meat, dairy and sugar could be on sale in the UK within 2 years, earlier than anticipated. This stuff has been around for a long time. We've talked about it, not en masse anywhere, but so far the FSA, the Food Standards Agency, have not given it any kind of green light. I think it's also quite expensive at the highest end, but they're exploring ways to accelerate the approval process for lab-grown foods. UK companies have already produced items like meatballs, animal fat in laboratories, but have faced challenges in gaining the FSA approval. Let's speak with Dustin Benson, Associate at Green Alliance and Sustainability, MD Forefront Advisor. Have I got that title roughly right, Dustin?
Roughly right. I work for Forefront Advisors, where I look after our sustainability work.
Well,
nice to chat.
There you go. I'm glad you're there, and I'm happy that you've joined us. I mean, I'm tempted to say this was always the sort of direction of travel. I think I can remember being at school and somebody saying at some point they'll make meat in laboratories.
You were in a very advanced school. I mean, this was new to me in about 2018. But yeah, it's been on the cards for a little while.
Yeah, people have talked about it. I don't know whether they talked about it as being genuinely something that was going to happen, but I think my overarching point is that for many people, this is a little bit too sci-fi.
Yeah, I guess that when you introduce it as you are, as kind of lab-grown meat or whatever, it does sound a bit sort of a bit unusual. But as you say, I think this is just a sort of normal evolution of technology. Look, there's lots of stuff that we do in our food system that if you deconstruct it feels a bit weird. I mean, there's a whole joke about don't look into a sausage factory. What I see with cultivated meat is a significant opportunity to make meat more cheaply and with much lower environmental impact. And I'm pretty glad that the FSA is actually on it, looking to regulate the industry sensibly and move forward quickly. It's been a long time coming, in my view.
Yeah. 2 years' time, potentially, this stuff could be on the shelves. The last I heard a story on this was that there were some very exclusive restaurants in Singapore and New York that were selling, you know, bits of chicken or steak or something that had been grown in labs, and it cost a squillion quid to have any of it. I assume that side of the story, in order to commercialise it, would have to be addressed.
Well, it's like with all new technologies, they start out expensive, and as you scale them up and you learn how to do them more cheaply, they come down in cost. I mean, across the whole family of alternative proteins, so you've got plant-based foods, which you can buy on the shelves today, and they can be cost competitive with conventional animal products now. You've got precision fermentation, which is legal in the United States and possibly coming to Europe as well. That's where you harness microbes to make proteins like casein and whey. These are the proteins that make cheese. And then there's cell cultivation, which is where you get some animal cells and you grow them and you turn them into fat or muscle. Or my favorite cell-grown product is actually cocoa. They're now looking to make cocoa from cells, to avoid some of the cost rises we're seeing as climate change makes many cocoa plantations expensive and difficult to run. So as I say, I think this is a kind of natural evolution. It's really good that the UK is moving quickly on it. It's taken a long time. I worked on the UK's national food strategy back in 2021, and we recommended that this technology be taken forward safely and carefully. So here we are, 4 years later, and the government's finally moving ahead.
So ultimately, we won't need any animals.
Oh, I wouldn't necessarily go that far. I think animals are probably here to stay. The way I see it is that cell-cultivated meat and other sorts of things are probably going to replace the chicken in that coronation chicken sandwich that you might be eating whilst you're running between meetings or just grabbing on the go. But I really think that, the Sunday roast or a nice steak or something like that, that's probably made by an animal and probably into the future.
I have to say, I've eaten enough burgers where I didn't think there was any chicken in them anyway. That's another story. But as we all
maybe there
have,
wasn't.
Maybe there wasn't. But I suppose my serious point is that there's going to be a knock-on effect here somewhere for the agricultural industry, for other areas of farming, perhaps.
Yeah, I think if you're a farmer who is trying to kind of pile them high and sell them cheap, then there's a risk for you. So the big volume end, the kind of mega dairies, the feedlot beef, there are some risks there. The good news, and this came from when I worked for the government, we did lots of talking to people. They don't see that as what farming, particularly British farming, is good at. So there's a real advantage, I think, to get rid of that cheap and frankly sometimes not very good for the planet or indeed for our health end of the market, and retain some of the good stuff that we all know and love, like the Sunday roast, I guess.
Sure. And the bottom line, I suppose, with anything that's kind of originated in a laboratory as distinct from a field or a greenhouse or something, is the taste test, right? I mean, if it tastes as good and the same, then consumers will buy into it. At the moment, a lot of the kind of vegetarian sort of options that purport to be a bit like meat, which I think is a genuine title name of one company, isn't really a bit like meat. It's kind of has a very, very, very subtle nod to it, but doesn't go the full way.
Yeah, and I think that's why some of the cultivated meat companies are focused on, for example, fat. There's nothing like animal fat for flavor, and you can see them moving to try to cultivate that. I think you're right that a lot of the vegetarian food that's on the market is designed for vegetarians, people who are willing to take a trade-off between flavor and their what they want to eat. The exciting thing about not just cell cultivation, but also precision fermentation, which is legal in the States and I've eaten, is it tastes a lot more like meat. And that flavor test, I think, is going to be critical, as of course is the cost.
Yeah. And you say you've tasted this. So give us a little bit more detail on that. What form did you taste it in and how close was it?
So I tasted a product called Impossible Burger, which launched maybe half a decade ago in the US. It's plant-based, but it has something in it called heme, which is the iron that you get in beef. It's made by a bacterium or a yeast, perhaps. I've forgotten precisely which one. Anyway, this is blended into the burger, and when you bite it, it has that kind of bloody taste that you get in a nice rare burger, and it's very satisfying. I think if you blind taste tested the average fast food burger, most people probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Yeah. It wasn't, a kind of really nice steak, but again, I don't think that's where the market is going to go. I think it'll be for the more commodity products, the kind of the stuff that you buy and have, with a beer with a friend or something like that.
Got it. Dustin, listen, thank you for your time, sir. Really appreciate that. It's going to be an interesting few years. Dustin Benton, who's associate at the Green Alliance and Sustainability Company. Thank you to him. Listen, if you had the option in a restaurant to have something that was lab grown and it was going to taste pretty much the same as distinct from the real deal, and they were the same price, what would you go for? Would you go, well, if no animals died, not that I'm a vegetarian, but if no animals died, that's a good thing, right? Same price, tastes pretty much the same. And we've all had a ropey steak or a ropey chicken burger from time to time. Where would you run with that? Or would you not at all? Are there any other inherent dangers? Not all vegan food, for example. People have to run away with this idea of vegan food, it's really, really healthy. And some of it will be. If you live your life eating lots of vegetables and fruit, I'm sure, and all the other, other bits of pulses and beans and rice, I'm sure it's very healthy. But there's a lot of stuff that is sold as vegan, and it is vegan, but doesn't mean it's healthy. There could be a shed load of sugar, shed load of salt, and various other processes put into that to get to that particular stage. But are we going in that direction? Quite clearly we're going in that direction. This is here for a reason. Give it 10 years. I'm sure I remember at school, he was surprised that I said that. I'm sure I remember at school somebody saying one day there won't be meat, we'll just eat stuff that's made in laboratories. But he said he hadn't heard this till 2018. I mean, we've been banging on about this on the radio for years, a couple of decades, definitely, that this would be a bit like the kind of cashless society argument. There'll be a time when there's no cash. There'll be a time when animals aren't involved in producing our meat, but we'll still eat something called meat. It'll just be grown down the science lab. 0344 499 1000. Sue says, on the subject of lab-grown meat, I remember as a teenager watching a TV programme about a restaurant that served pieces of cardboard in beef gravy, which they passed as sliced beef. So forget the labs, just save your Amazon packaging. Was it like an expose of an iffy restaurant, or was it kind of a test to see if anyone noticed, and then they revealed, you do realise you've just eaten a cardboard box? Maybe it was that. This was the story I was going to bring you just before the break as well. Foreigners are convicted of up to a quarter of sex crimes, according to the first data analyst of its kind. Data from the Ministry of Justice obtained under a Freedom of Information law shows that 15% of sexual offences, including rape, were accounted for by foreign nationals between 2021 and 2023. A further 8% of convictions were recorded as unknown nationalities. Those labelled unknown are likely to largely include non-British nationals, taking the number potentially to around about 23% of foreign criminals responsible for sex crimes. Two nationalities, Afghans and Eritreans, were more than 20 times more likely to account for sexual offences convictions than British citizens, according to the data. And we can argue forever as to the reasons and the thinking behind that. That story has just dropped. It came courtesy of the Telegraph. It's something we're likely to get into on tomorrow's programme. And if you're thinking of bringing a foreign person over in your car, then beware, because there's a couple that's just been fined 1,500 quid. In fact, they didn't even think about bringing a foreign person over in their car. When they got to the other end, they realised somebody had essentially hitched a lift, zipped themselves inside the cover of a bike rack. So when they got back home, they found the person in there. They later received a fine from the Home Office for failing to check that no clandestine entrant was concealed in their motorhome. The pair said they were drafting an appeal. The Home Office said the penalties were designed to target negligence rather than criminality. 1,500 quid for somebody else's offence? Seems a bit steep to me. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Thousands of people. I think, if my figures are correct, I think 1,900 people came in just last week alone. We don't know. Some people are not, registering. They're just going on the run. And who knows, they could be going into terrorist cells in the country and nobody in the country ever knows who these people are.
Yeah.
And that's the really scary thing. And this is what, the organisation that we pay for, Prevent, is meant to prevent. And yet, it's just another attack waiting to happen.
It really is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Peter says, lab-grown meat all sounds a bit Soylent Green to me. Still haven't seen that film. Determined to, but it's all in this kind of area. I'll tell you what it reminded me of. If you've ever read Brave New World, you get was it called Soma, the tablet, the daily tablet you were given, which was meant to give you a sort of euphoric feeling that you might get from alcohol or religious worship or something. So it kept people peaceful, basically. So give the masses their daily dose and they'll be fine. They're all right with everything. But there's a lot of other things you can't do in the Brave New World. It's incredible. Everyone talks about George Orwell. It's always like George Orwell, 1984. There's a couple of others there as well that are in that sort of dystopian world that are definitely worth a look at. I wish they'd teach that in school, frankly. There's a lot in there that you could debate. I know there's a lot of conspiratorial stuff, but some of it you look at, wow, they did write that 50 years ago. Gareth is in Derbyshire. On reform, what have you got for us, Gareth? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Nice to speak to you.
You too.
Beautiful day in Derbyshire.
That's good to hear. Yes, a bit chilly, a bit cloudier here today, but the weekend was gorgeous. So
it's 30 degrees here today.
Stop it.
Yeah.
So what are you making of this reform storm?
Well, I just think the cat's out of the bag, really, isn't it, with reform? I think it's melted away. I think I've said before it'll slowly melt away. It's like the glacier in wherever that is on there. It's like the snow in ski resorts. It's going down the slope. This spat, it just shows that, they've tried to come across as if they're going to be the opposition to the Labour Party at the next election. But the reality is, we can see that they just really are a one-man band because it's being run by Nigel Farage. He hasn't put a proper structure in place so it can be treated as a responsible political party. You can't run What would he do if he was elected? He'd elect himself to be the cabinet, would he? And he wouldn't have any Home Office. He'd just
he'd be doing every job. Well, I mean, maybe in his heart he would like to think that, but I think he would be sensible enough to know, wouldn't he, that you've got to share the love.
Well, you would hope so, but you can't have a party that you can't remove the leader if everybody else in the party doesn't agree with the leader, and that's what they've got at the moment. That's the problem that's being pointed out by, was it Ben Habib? He did. And I've noticed that quite a few of their supporters around the country are actually leaving the party out for one reason or another. So,
where are your own allegiances, Gareth? Are they in the direction of reform, ultimately?
No. There's only one opposition to Labour, and it's the Conservative Party. Conservatives have, they've taken a little bit of a flapping, as it were, because of what happened.
But the Tory party, it's hard to know what they stand for now, isn't it? Because, there's a whole load of new narratives that they aren't talking about, that Reform are talking about, and that nobody's believing Kemi Badenoch on immigration or on, some of the madness of wastage in government. They're not on that page, are they? Which is the page that many people find rather attractive.
Well, the Conservatives need to renew themselves. They need to come back to the country with some sensible policies, which they will do. There's no doubt about that. I mean, if you're voting in local elections, if you vote Conservative, you know that Conservatives will fight against the countryside being destroyed by Labour's ridiculous housing plans. Yeah. I mean, they've got some totally... I mean, they're just going to concrete over the countryside. I'm worried about Derbyshire. I'm worried about places like Matlock, Ashbourne in Derbyshire, where Labour's policies, they basically want to build new towns all over the countryside.
Yeah,
so
they love that. They don't really recognise fields in the Labour department unless they can put a solar panel in it.
No, they've not been out of wherever it is in London, but they need to come to Derbyshire, speak to local people and see what they think. So, Conservatives are the future. They didn't do too well in the last general election, but I think the next one, it certainly won't be Reform. And if anybody's thinking of voting Reform, it's really just to vote for Labour. So you just need to not do it, please. It's just a ridiculous idea.
Well, Reform, of course, would say, Gareth, my child, come with us on this journey, because there's more to see than the headlines. We've got a grand plan and it will benefit Derbyshire.
Yeah, well, I doubt it, and to be a child again, but I'm going in the other direction, I'm afraid.
Well, we're all going in that direction, mate, so I'll see you on the bus. Gareth, thank you. Gareth in Derbyshire. This comes in from Sharon. No way am I eating lab-grown meat. Nope. Get in the bin. It's like a horror film. Will they never learn? Stop playing with our food. One in from Wayne referenced the couple that were fined £1,500 from finding an illegal in the back of their bike rack or something. So the couple were fined for not checking their motorhome, but I bet illegal migrants were put up in a hotel, given a mobile phone and otherwise rewarded for breaking the law. And Neil, similarly, says £1,500 for bringing a stowaway over the channel they didn't know about. But how many Border Force bringing over on a daily basis without any charge at all? It's a bit rich, a bit extraordinary, isn't it, when you look at how... the numbers we have on a day. I don't know what the weekend numbers are for channel crossings, by the way. I was out there yesterday. I was down in Camber in Kent. And, is Camber in Sussex? I think it's in East Sussex, isn't it? I was down there. Australia, yes. No, not Canberra. Camber. Jesse, you must have been to Camber Sands.
Can I just tell you how bizarre my life is if I could get it in? Can I just tell you how bizarre my life is?
That was the end of the story.
As I walked past, your producer went, lab-grown meat. What's he talking about?
We're talking about lab-grown meat.
Whatever. Camber Sands.
Camber Sands.
Do you know what camber the word means?
Camber as in you can camber?
Yeah.
Yes.
The camber on the road?
Yes.
Yeah, Camber Sands. Am I being nice about it?
I don't know.
I went once and it was closed.
It was...
It's on a par with Western Super Mud, isn't it?
Well, the one thing I always remember as a kid about Camber Sands is it had a Pontins there, and I desperately wanted to go there because I thought it sounds like the most exciting thing in the world.
When we were kids, right, we went to Lyme Regis, I don't know, seemingly every year, right? Yeah. And we, honestly, as kids, right? And there was a penny arcade. I would spend hours walking around, aged 8, 9, 10, making sure somebody had forgotten their 2p's and they'd left it in the thing.
Yeah.
Honestly, made a whole evening out of it.
The breaking news, by the way,
Yes,
is that
dear.
I drove past Pontins yesterday.
Did you?
Closed down.
No way.
Well, if that's
where will we end up if we can't end up as a
well, that's where
redcoat?
Shane Ritchie started at
He did.
Pontins in Camden.
And possibly could finish.
Well, not at that one. If that's a refurb, then it's a heck of a
Do you
job
see
they've
yourself
got
as a
ahead.
red coat? In the
I was a
future?
blue coat.
You weren't.
I seriously did it.
Oh no, you didn't.
I did.
Were you funny?
I did. No, I wasn't that kind of blue. I mean, I was 18. I just nipped up for a summer job. It was.
Did you get quite a bit of female attention?
I was 18. I mean, I was a kid.
Yeah. Did you get quite a lot of female attention?
You get a little.
Collins is on the hook here.
When I was calling bingo.
Yeah.
I mean, I could call bingo like nobody could call bingo.
Right, let's do this because it was my first job at 17 at Lyme Regis. Bingo call on Blue 21. If you catch your numbers, we'll check your cars. Eyes down, looking, and away we go. And the first one is Legs 11 Downing Street, number 11. Two little ducks.
Maggie's Den, number 10.
Maggie's Den, two little ducks.
All the 22. All the fours, 44. Two fat ladies.
You're not allowed to say that anymore.
You can't say any of that
You
stuff
can't
anymore.
say two fat ladies anymore, can you?
You can't say that. You can't say nothing these days, Jezza.
Nah, the world's gone nuts,
The world's
mate.
gone nuts. Got in reverse. What's happening?
What is happening? I know everybody's talking about reform. I know everybody's talking about the Palestinian migrant or the couple fined after finding a migrant in their motorhome. You must be more vigilant. Have a look. I think we need to be talking about the BBC as well. They've spent £1.3 million investigating Hugh Edwards, including 340 grand on legal advice over the decision to suspend him on full pay, and still they have not got his pension back.
No, and they're not going to. No, so he ain't giving it back.
He don't care. He's a paedophile. He's walked free.
He doesn't have to. So
loads going on in the world. What do you make?